making a conscious choice to harm patients by striking across England and Wales.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? When?
Steve Barclay claims unions are refusing to work with the government at a national level over how they cover emergency calls during strike action. Unite's Sharon Graham says his comments are a blatant lie and an embarrassment for him and the government. GMB has called the comments insulting, and Unison's General Secretary Christina McAnea says Mr Barclay doesn't want to negotiate.
We sit down in a room, you have a bit of give and take on both sides. But I'm getting nothing from him or from this government. All they're saying to me is, we can't negotiate about pay. And where does that leave us? One of the reasons the ambulance service, the NHS, is in such a dire state is because they haven't invested in the workforce. So people leave. Those who are left are under increasing pressure. These people don't get meal breaks. They hardly get a day off. They work excessive overtime because it's the only way the service can run.
However, the Health Secretary maintains the government is trying to work constructively with the trade unions.
Clearly, we will need to look at the data from today to see whether the assumptions that the trade unions have promised materialise. They've said, on the one hand, they want to cause maximum disruption, but on the other hand, that they don't want to cause harm to patients. So we've tried to work constructively with the trade unions, but of course, if we see significant patient harm, then as a government we will need to look at what is done in terms of minimum service levels.
Paramedic Paul Turner says despite today's action, patients should feel safe and striking workers are still responding to emergencies.
We have responded to the life and limb calls that have come in. So as far as we're concerned, there's been no issue to patient care today. What is amazing today, though, is the amount of calls that we normally see coming in, we aren't seeing today. Those calls are significantly lower than what we normally do. And therefore, today, you know, these patients will be getting better treatment than what they do any other day.
And it's been confirmed today that nurses in Scotland will announce strike dates in the new year. Now, that's after the Royal College of Nursing members overwhelmingly rejected the latest pay deal from the Scottish Government. 82% voted against the offer, which ministers said would ensure staff in Scotland remain the best paid NHS workers in the UK. A man who admitted murdering his pregnant partner and 3 children in Derbyshire will spend the rest of his life in jail. Damien Bendel was given a whole life order for killing Terry Harris, her children Lacey and John Paul Bennett, and Lacey's friend Connie Gent with a claw hammer in Killamarsh in September last year. The 32-year-old also pleaded guilty to raping one of the children. The prosecutor told the court they were brutal, vicious and cruel attacks on a defenceless woman and young children. The Home Secretary says the government is actively considering the use of cruise ships to house asylum seekers. Suella Braverman says the vessels, along with disused holiday parks and former student halls, are among the options being looked at to help reduce the reliance on hotels. She told the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee that hotels are an unacceptable cost to the taxpayer and alternative sites are needed. The Home Secretary also addressed the delay in sending migrants to Rwanda.
We are returning people almost every week to various countries around the world. We do that through scheduled flights, we charter flights. So we're in a variety of discussions with several airlines for lots of different destinations. When it comes to Rwanda, at the moment, the delivery of Rwanda, i.e. removing people to Rwanda, is on pause. It's on hold whilst we are going through litigation.
The High Court's ruled the government's post-Brexit settlement scheme, which would demand EU citizens to reapply for the right to live and work in the UK, is unlawful. The Independent Monitoring Authority, that's a body set up to oversee citizens' rights, argued Britain is breaching its withdrawal agreement with the EU. Home Office Minister Simon Murray says the government intend to appeal the ruling. And this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now it is back to Patrick.
New guy's good, isn't he? Hey, there we go. Right, OK, we start this hour with our very top story. Thousands of ambulance workers have walked out in a pay dispute and working conditions issues as well. Within the last hour, a veteran nurse and lifelong Conservative voter, has said that the party has lost his vote over their treatment of the NHS staff, saying the Health Secretary has made him feel worthless. It's over comments by Steve Barclay, who said that the unions have made a conscious choice to inflict harm on patients. It's worthwhile noting that because the blame game is now starting. Unions obviously blaming the government. Fair enough. Steve Barclay, off of the government, saying that it's the unions' fault. They have made a conscious choice to inflict harm on patients. I want to know what you think about that. Whose side are you on there? GBViews at GBNews.uk. Around 25,000 call handlers, paramedics and ambulance drivers have walked out today and have been at picket lines throughout the country. The public's been warned to only call 999 in the case of an emergency. Yes, so there you go. Don't get ill today, basically. Our London reporter, Alice Porter, is outside Waterloo Ambulance Station this afternoon. Alice, I can see rather a lot going on behind you there. Talk us through it, please.
Hi there. Yes, it's a noisy picket line behind me. This is one of 28 unison picket lines in London. But my understanding is I was just speaking to one paramedic and they are prepared to leave the picket line and go to any Category 1 emergency calls at any moment. They're saying on average, one person is leaving the picket line across London an hour to attend to emergency calls. But as you were just saying there, of course, people are being advised to only call if they believe they may be dying. I mean, that is incredibly a strong language, almost as strong as the language which we've been hearing from Stephen Barclay and from the unions, both very much blaming each other for the situation. There were talks late last night between different bodies, different unions and Stephen Barclay, but obviously to no avail, hence the striking today. I was actually earlier speaking to the General Secretary of Unison, Christys McAney, and this is what she had to say to me about those talks.
We sit down in a room, you have a bit of give and take on both sides, but I'm getting nothing from him or from this government. All they're saying to me is, we can't negotiate about pay. And where does that leave us? One of the reasons the ambulance service, the NHS, is in such a dire state is because they haven't invested in the workforce. So people leave, those who are left are under increasing pressure. These people don't get meal breaks. They hardly get a day off. They work excessive overtime because it's the only way the service can run.
That was Christys McAney speaking to me there from Unison. Now, of course, like all these strikes, pay is very much at the heart of it. The government say they have offered a £1,400 pay review to ambulance workers. They say they've taken on board suggestions from the independent pay review. But, of course, it's important to point out that is not anything that's binding. The government doesn't have to do that. And, in fact, multiple times this year, the government have gone against the independent pay review. So they don't have to abide by it. They have chosen to abide by it, but of course that's led to a huge amount of frustration, not just from, of course, ambulance workers, but of course nurses who were striking only yesterday. I think the real concern is that this issue is not being resolved, and Christmas is so only just around the corner. We've got more strikes expected on Wednesday with ambulance workers, but to see this increasing heightened rhetoric between the government and the unions doesn't seem to be calming down anytime soon.
No, absolutely not. There is very much a blame game going on. Alice, thank you very much. Alice Porter there, just reporting from a picket line in Waterloo. The emails flooding in thick and fast. We're going to be covering this pretty much throughout the show, as I'm sure you would imagine. I am asking you, in light of the fact that there is a whopping great big blame game going on, who do you blame for the position that we're in at the minute? Steve Barclay not mincing his words when it came to the ambulance strike, saying that they're essentially deliberately targeting patients. The unions, of course, saying that they've been given a derogatory pay offer and that they want more. It's a mixed bag in the inbox. Keep them coming in. I'll go to those shortly. GBViews at GBnews.uk. Just very quickly, a little bit of context for you before I go to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, in terms of the services in your area. I've just got the latest here. Everywhere apart from the east of England is striking, right? And basically all of them have said that there's a critical incident going on and that Category 1 are the only ones they're really going to race to today, and that is life-threatening injuries such as cardiac arrest. So everyone else, which includes strokes and sepsis and major burns and people giving birth at home? No. There we go. Coming into us just now, yes, reports the number of people phoning 999 appears to have dropped in some parts of England today as the staff strike. That's important. People not actually calling for an ambulance. The West Midlands Ambulance Trust is thanking people for heeding their advice to only call in an emergency. Let's go now to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster. Darren, thank you very much. Steve Bartley, very, very much putting a blame for this on the unions.
It's difficult to work out, Patrick, in many ways, what the strategy of the government is in all of this. They're having emergency meetings. We had another Cobra one in Whitehall today, attended by various ministers, not just Steve Barclay, because clearly these strikes are having an impact on a number of different ministries, I should say, not least of all the Ministry of Defence, who've been called in many regards to fulfil some of these functions and roles. I think in many regards, though, what is notable is the rhetoric of the government has been dialed up massively in the last number of days, not least of all overnight. Steve Barclay causing real anger in the unions when he said that the unions had taken a conscious choice to inflict harm on patients at the worst possible time of the year, i.e. around Christmas. Now, that provoked a pretty angry response, the unions branding that as a blatant lie. So that does seem at least to be what the government's response is at the moment, which is not to go to the negotiating table, not to suggest that pay is up for grabs in all of this, but rather to attack the unions. Now, why might they be doing that? Well, if you look at the opinion polls at the moment, at least it seems to suggest when it comes to the paramedics and the nurses, public opinion seems to be on their side, not on the government's side. Now, that differs when you talk about Border Force guards and rail strikes and postal workers, for example. But you have to say the government is in a bit of a tricky situation here because, frankly, there is no seemingly end to all of this. The unions are now talking about these strikes lasting not just over Christmas and the New Year period, but well into January and February of next year. And if the government's not prepared to compromise on this and point to the fact that it is up to the independent pay bodies to sort this out, if they're not prepared to do that, where will public opinion fall down on? Will it potentially, as the strikes carry on, will they start attacking the unions for not compromising, or will they, frankly, blame the government for not coming to the table to start negotiations? It could really backfire on Rishi Sunak and the cabinet.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a tightrope situation, isn't it? Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much. GBNews' political editor there from Westminster, just whizzing you through the political angle on it. We've had picket lines. I've got a load of your views coming in as well. It looks as though striking paramedics could continue, though, to have the vast majority of public support. I always like to keep an eye on the opinion polls, and apparently, anyway, it does appear that upwards of 60%, in fact, let's have a look at the exact stats, shall we? It clearly shows 63% of people 63% of people back ambulance workers who are on strike today, with nurses who walked out yesterday having even more public support. 65% of people support their cause. That's a YouGov poll, and I am fascinated by that, really. And I do want to hear from you, GBViews at gbnews.uk. It will be fascinating to see whether or not the support drops as people can't get an ambulance today, or if this rolls on into the new year, but we'll have to wait and see. Let's speak now to Tom Coffey, a paramedic who's been on a night shift, I believe. Tom, thank you very, very much. So just fill me in a little bit exactly, and our viewers and our listeners, exactly who you are, what you do. So you just got off the back of a night shift, have you, mate?
First of all, thank you, Patrick, for having me on the show. I was on a night shift last night. I'll be on another night shift tonight. I personally work. So I work in the southwest of England, and I personally won't be striking. However, I do have sympathy for my colleagues who choose to strike. It has been an absolutely agonising decision for them. Strike or no strike, I've got respect for everyone who I work with, but personally, I won't be.
Well, just fill me in a little bit on why you won't be striking, because I think you epitomise where a lot of people are at and kind of where I'm at, really, which is massive sympathy for the job that you do. I absolutely couldn't do it. And if I ever had to call an ambulance, I would hope that someone like yourself turns up. But there are moral connotations to the idea of somebody in your profession going on strike. So why are you not striking?
Well, absolutely. So you say that response will be happening to category 1s and 2s today. To be honest, Patrick, before the strike, we're struggling to get to them anyway. People are waiting hours and hours, especially over the past couple of weeks, for responses. And I have to do my little bit to keep the service moving. My moral conscience won't personally let me walk out on this. People are dying waiting for ambulances. I've seen it firsthand. So, yeah.
Well, I'm kind of glad that you brought that up, because I have got a few facts and figures here in front of me about ambulance waiting times, ambulance targets as well. And when it comes to, you know, them hoping that you get an ambulance within a matter of moments or minutes, I should say, you know, supposedly anyway, for Category 1, they would like you there in about 7 minutes. Apparently, the average is about 9.26 minutes. I think that's not the worst time in the world, is it? But then it kind of seems to slip down quite dramatically. Category 2, they want you there in about 18 minutes as a target. Apparently, the actual average is 48 minutes. And then Category 3, 2 hours, and actual time, 2 hours 43. You get the drift there, really. And so some people are saying, oh, well, the service that we're already getting from the ambulance isn't good enough. That sounds a bit unfair to say. What do you think?
Well, at the moment, we are unfortunately failing patients. You know, if somebody suffers a cardiac arrest, minutes count. And if ambulances are stuck outside hospitals, as they are at the moment, we can't get to them. So when I'm at a hospital with a patient, we hear the radio go off frequently and they say there's no ambulances to send. And it's absolutely soul-destroying to be sat outside hospital, not being able to help people. I've got to say, with the strike action as well, it's far more of an issue than just pay alone. So many in the mainstream media, and unfortunately the unions as well, would just have you believe it's about pay. It's a far bigger issue than pay. It's the fact so much of our time is wasted sat outside hospitals, and the hospitals and the social care system really do need to work together to improve ambulance flow so we can get to those emergencies and help people and ultimately save lives.
Right, so how do we sort that bit out then? Because you are right, this has been dominated by pay. I think that's probably been exacerbated by the fact that pretty much everyone is suffering during the cost of living crisis at the moment. So when your average common man and woman on the street is looking at their bank balance and not seeing the numbers that they would like, and then you hear about people going on strike, I think it's quite natural to assume that it is mostly about pay, but you're saying that it's conditions and being able to function as well. So just talk to me a bit about what could improve there. You are spending far too long sitting outside hospitals with patients at the minute. How do we fix that?
Unfortunately, Patrick, whoever comes up with the answer for that will be a very clever person, I've got to say. So we've got to improve community services and health prevention as well. So avoiding people going to hospital in the first place, ensuring that people have got quick access to GP appointments. So if somebody can't get through to their GP, their health will naturally get worse, and then they will have to go into hospital as a result. There's lots of things that can be done, and unfortunately there's no easy answers, but I hope that we can sort of get over this.
Just got time for one more one with you, really. Now, look, as you can imagine, I get loads of emails in and getting them now from people who are just very, very concerned because they might get ill today and want an ambulance. And you do think that unequivocally these strikes are going to have an impact when it comes to public health. Steve Barclay, Health Secretary, has said that the unions are basically deliberately targeting patients. Is there an element of truth to that?
It's really tricky to say. I mean, personally, so the unions where I'm working, they've allowed people who are striking to respond to Category 1 calls such as cardiac arrests and seizures, and Category 2 calls such as heart attacks and strokes. So if you are very ill, I've got no doubt that an ambulance will get to you. So please, my message to the public would be still call 999 if you're seriously ill. But if you can get to hospital either in a taxi or if somebody can help you, it would be really good if people could do that.
Look, I always feel a bit ropey asking this, but I've got to, really, given the context of it. I know that it's not just about pay, and I know that we've spoken about the conditions as well. Pay is a part of it. Can I will stop short of asking you exactly what amount you're on. It feels like a bit like as invasive as going through your medical notes, doesn't it? Which I'm sure no one would particularly want us to do. But, yeah, have you had a pay rise at all in the last couple of years?
So I am relatively quite new into the job myself. I've only been working in it for a couple of years, so it'd be really difficult for me to say. Colleagues who've been in the job for a lot longer, I would have a little bit more sympathy with them overpay, you know, 'cause if they haven't seen their pay go up quite as much as they'd expect. I do have some sympathy, but it'd be unfair for me, being quite new into the job, to comment on that.
But as a relatively new recruit, I know, look, we all want more money, right? Don't get me wrong, but you're all right with the pay that you've got at the minute, are you?
I mean, everything could be better, but I don't struggle to pay my bills. I do some overtime as well, so I don't go without, put it that way.
All right, mate. Look, I really, really appreciate you coming on. And look, thank you for everything that you do, and thank you for the fact that you just got off the back of a night shift. You've taken the time to come here and speak so eloquently. I can only say, you know, anyone who needs an ambulance in a time of crisis will be incredibly lucky to see you there with the blues and twos on. Thank you very, very much. Massively appreciate everything.
Thank you very much.
All right, mate. Tom Coffey there, who's a paramedic just straight off the back of a night shift. And look, let's be honest, answering, I think, pretty much a broad range of questions there, right from conditions that they're going through at the minute to why he's not striking, why some of his colleagues are, where the pay level is at the minute, and kind of who's to blame for the situation that we're in at the minute. There's going to be a lot of this coming through. I want your reaction as ever. That email, I know I keep banging on about it, but it's because I love to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Get them coming in. Loads of you already have. I'll go to some on the back of this break, because coming up, we could be on the verge, another big issue for you, of seeing offshore processing introduced right here in the UK when channel migrants, well, cross the channel illegally. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, will bring you the very latest on that. And as the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has accused trade unions of making a conscious decision to inflict harm on patients. He's not mincing his words. As thousands of ambulance staff walk out, we will be having a massive, massive ask and big debates and all of this. Whose fault is it if serious harm comes to patients during strike action? Whose fault is it? I'll be back in a minute.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison. I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
OK, people, well, it's not all strikes today because the Home Secretary has confirmed the government is actively considering the use of cruise ships to accommodate asylum seekers. Giving evidence to the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee, Suella Braverman confirmed that as well as disused holiday parks and military sites, the use of vessels is also being assessed. So the Home Secretary also defended the use of private contractors to find asylum seeker accommodation over allegations they are making vast profits, which they obviously are. Mark White joins us live in the studio to pick this one apart. Mark, I don't know, take it away. Start with cruise ships, maybe? Up to you.
Yeah, well, there is an imperative, there's no doubt, to try to find accommodation for asylum seekers. 100,000 people at the moment are in accommodation in the UK awaiting asylum decisions. Some are in local authority dispersal, so they've gone into council houses or in the rented, private rented sector. The others, about 40,000, are in hotels. It's costing an almighty sum of money, £3.5 billion a year for these 100,000 individuals. So the government is looking to alternatives. That's why the Prime Minister said last week that among the things they were looking into is the use of disused holiday parks, former student accommodation, maybe military sites. But we know that if you go for these sites on land, as we saw with Linton on Ouse up in Yorkshire, you get villagers in that local community very concerned about the prospect of 3 times the population of their village suddenly coming and taking up residence in the old RAF base there. So another potential avenue they're looking at is cruise ships. Now, people have been speculating for some time that this might be a good alternative possibility. Now, giving evidence to the Lords Home Affairs Committee, Suella Braverman indicated that this was being actively considered. This is what she said.
And as you heard from the PM, we will bring forward a range of alternative sites, and they will include disused holiday parks, former student halls are sites. Well, I should say we are looking at those sites. I wouldn't say anything's confirmed yet, but we need to bring forward thousands of places. And when you talk about vessels, I would just say, and all I can say, because we are in discussions with a wide variety of providers, that everything is still on the table.
OK, well, first the Rwanda planes may be taking off, and now cruise ships, offshore processing, maybe. Some people would be banging in favour of this, but not, as I understand it, the human rights lot.
No, and one of those, Baroness Helena Kennedy, was in the Lords on that committee questioning Suella Braverman today. Fair to describe her, I think, as far as the government's categorisation of our particular breed of lawyers as the lefty lawyers that have been throwing spanners into the works on a regular basis when it comes to immigration and the asylum process. On this particular line of questioning, Helena Kennedy was rather upset about the fact that these private companies making huge amounts of money, which they are, out of trying to find accommodation, hotel accommodation for asylum seekers. As she says, or hopes it would be better done by the likes of NGOs. This is the exchange between Suella Braverman and Baroness Kennedy.
There is a huge amount of money that is going into accommodating a very large number of asylum seekers.
A lot of profit is made by the private companies that you're using to do that. If you look at Companies House and look at the profits that have been made by those companies, it's quite shocking that the public purse is paying out to private companies and that they're making profit from it. Why aren't you using NGOs, other sorts of bodies that are not going to be profit-making to provide the sort of support that asylum seekers need?
It's not realistic.
Well, what's wrong with local authorities?
You know, we've got, as I said, 100,000 people that we need to house. If you can point me to a charity that can provide 100,000 beds, I'd be very interested. There just isn't one.
Yeah, I mean, that's the answer, isn't it? I mean, there isn't an NGO that could do that. Is that right?
No, but neither are these private companies. So she's been slightly disingenuous with that answer because the private companies are not providing 100,000 beds. They're going off and they're speaking to hotel chains and saying, look, could we come to an arrangement to take over your hotel for a year or however long it might be. This is how much money you'll get. We'll guarantee you full occupancy. So they're acting as the sort of go-between from the Home Office to the hotel chains. So I guess Baroness Kennedy is right to an extent. You could have an NGO, non-profit making NGO, or even a local authority doing that particular legwork rather than these private companies making a shed load of money.
OK, interesting stuff. Well, watch this space when it comes to the old cruise ships as well, I suppose, and that really could be... I mean, actually, how practical is that? Because are there a load of disused cruise ships that are going to end up with P&O migrants?
Yeah, within the industry there is. And remember, they've gone through a huge downturn because of COVID as well. So there are definitely cruise ships out there, and it kind of gets over one of the big fundamental issues about trying to find sites on land, which is no one wants hundreds or potentially thousands of asylum seekers necessarily in their backyard. If they're offshore on a cruise ship, you manage to circumvent that particular problem.
Mark White, thank you very, very much. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, keeping you abreast of the latest situation. What do you make of all of that, ladies and gentlemen? First, there was a little bit of a win in the High Court, wasn't there, when it came to Rwanda flights taking off, and now potentially offshore processing as well. Your views. But coming up, controversial gender reforms are likely to pass in Scotland today. If it does, 15-year-old children will be able to begin the process of changing their gender under SNP trans laws. Bear in mind that kids can already change their gender on the school register without parental consent up there. And as the Health Secretary Steve Barclay has accused trade unions of making a conscious decision to inflict harm on patients, I will ask, whose fault is it if serious harm comes to patients during this strike action? I will, of course, be getting your views. I've been threatening to for a while now, but I promise you I'll do it when I come back after the latest headlines.
It is 32 minutes past 3. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Ambulance unions have reacted angrily after the government accused them of making a conscious choice to harm patients by striking across England and Wales.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? When?
Steve Barclay claims unions are refusing to work with the government at a national level over how they cover emergency calls during strike action. Unite's Sharon Graham says his comments are a blatant lie and an embarrassment for him and the government. GMB has called the comments insulting, and Unison's General Secretary Christine McInerney says Mr Barclay doesn't want to negotiate.
We sit down in a room, you have a bit of give and take on both sides. But I'm getting nothing from him or from this government. All they're saying to me is, we can't negotiate about pay. And where does that leave us? One of the reasons the ambulance service, the NHS, is in such a dire state is because they haven't invested in the workforce. So people leave. Those who are left are under increasing pressure. These people don't get meal breaks. They hardly get a day off. They work excessive overtime because it's the only way the service can run.
A man who admitted murdering his pregnant partner and 3 children in Derbyshire will spend the rest of his life in jail. Damien Bendel was given a whole life order for killing Terry Harris, her children Lacey and John Paul Bennett, and Lacey's friend Connie Gent with a clawhammer in Killamarsh in September last year. The 32-year-old also pleaded guilty to raping one of the children. The Home Trek Secretary says the government's actively considering the use of cruise ships to house asylum seekers. Suella Braverman says the vessels, along with disused holiday parks and former student halls, are among the options being looked at to help reduce the reliance on hotels. She told the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee hotels are an unacceptable cost to the taxpayer and alternative sites are needed. That is it for the moment. On TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. A quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2112 and €1.1412. The price of gold is £1,503.33 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 74.61.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, just before I get stuck into the very latest Scottish madness that's taking place north of the border, a few of you have been getting in touch. Tracy in Essex, I'm asking, who do you blame for the ambulance strikes that are taking place today, and who would you blame if indeed, sadly, people die? And Tracy has been on. Tracy says it's the fault of the unions if people die. Nurses knew the government's offer for 9 or 10 months. Why did they wait until now to strike? Graham says the ambulance and nurses need to wake up, strike against the overpaid management that is mismanaging them. But Paul has a different view. He says this government needs to go. They simply do not want to do anything to help this country's situation. John, again, not really in favour of these strikes. He's saying that you should be given a P45 if they strike. But Will, just as a final view, says, I do think the government has a clear responsibility to up its offer, but he does go on to say that he's not in favour of these strikes. I think Will's comment is kind of where I suspect, anyway, the vast majority of people don't support the strikes, but wouldn't necessarily be against a little bit more wedge for them either. Keep those views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But we're going north of the border now, people, OK? The Scottish Parliament has been debating whether children as young as 16 should be able to change their legal gender this afternoon. I don't know whether that means they can just do it straight away this afternoon or whether they've been debating it this afternoon. But MSPs are considering whether to remove certain hurdles to changing gender, which are specified in the 2004 Gender Recognition Act. If the bill is passed, those wanting to change their designation will no longer need a doctor's diagnosis of gender dysphoria. They'll also need to have lived in their chosen gender for just 3 months, and that's down from 2 years. I believe our political reporter Olivia Utley has been living in her chosen gender for a lot longer than 3 months. What's going on?
Yeah, so it's very, very controversial legislation which has been going through Holyrood for the last month or so, and basically it removes all the safeguards that are in place for changing gender. So under the new legislation, an adult, anyone over 18, can live in their acquired gender, as it's called, for 3 months, and then they can change their legal sex. Now, and if you're between 16 and 18, that goes up to 6 months, but way down from what it was before, which was 2 years. Now, the problem is that well, there are a number of problems. One is that it opens the door to those who aren't actually transgender, men who wish to pose as a woman, to gain access to women's spaces. That's one worry. So you could have men claiming that they're female, designating themselves as female after 3 months living in their acquired gender in order to play the system. Perverts and criminals, basically. And there was an amendment which was tabled last night. There was a marathon Holyrood session last night, lasted for 10 hours. There was an amendment which was tabled by an SNP backbencher, actually, which would mean that those who are awaiting trial for rape and sexual abuse would be exempt from this. They wouldn't be able to gain a gender recognition certificate. But that amendment was defeated. Oh, great. So essentially they're just ploughing on with this legislation. The scenes in Holyrood at the moment, I've just been talking to someone who's there, are, I mean, insane. There are hundreds and hundreds of women who are there to sort of bear witness to what's going on. There's barely any civility going on at the moment. This session this afternoon is expected to be very, very long as well. Certain complaints have been raised about the fact that there's no real urgency to bring this legislation through. Usually these sort of marathon sessions would be reserved for something like a lockdown that must be implemented immediately. The reason it seems that the SNP is so keen to get this legislation through is that Kate Forbes, a close ally of Nicola Sturgeon on most issues, is very anti this bill, and they want to get it through before she comes back from maternity leave in January.
Are you joking?
That appears to be why they're so keen on getting it over the line before Christmas. And that has obviously raised lots of questions about whether legislation that's so seismic should be done this quickly, although those who are supporting the bill would say that it's necessary for trans people who are a marginalised group to be their lives to be made easier in any way that's possible.
OK, right, OK. I'm going to go to a guest, but just very quickly, almost like a little bullet point thingy then. So in terms of what's being made easier for people who are already men who are on trial for things like rape can just change their gender.
Change their legal sex
so
after 3 months of living in their acquired gender. So they could, in theory, go to a women's prison.
Right, OK, all right. And just general men as well who have pretty nefarious ideas about women potentially. If I just decided that I wanted to be a woman and lived as a woman for 3 months, I could then become a woman.
And those who are opposing the bill are very clear to point out that they're not actually talking about transgender people here. They're looking at people who are deliberately wanting to exploit the system. The other separate issue is those children, even under 16-year-olds, if they live in their acquired gender, they would be able to change sex on their 16th birthday.
Grief. All right, Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Utley there, our political reporter. Well, joining me now is human rights activist Miranda Yardley. Miranda, thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on a few bits and bobs there. It's great to have you on the show again. I'm keen to know where you stand on this, because when you really add the extra layer to it as well, which is that it looks as though the SNP is ploughing on with this, despite the fact that there are huge protests, a lot of women with lived experience there giving their statements, and the fact that a big political opponent to Nicola Sturgeon is off on maternity leave, so they want to rush it through, it does beg the question, why are they doing this?
Well, there you go. Interesting they use the word reform, because reform implies improvement, and this law isn't an improvement to anything. I'd like to say at the outset I agree with most of what Olivia has just said. In addition, I would say that this really is it's a undemocratic and cynical engineering of a conflict of laws with the rest of the UK. And I think it is part of a mechanism that Sturgeon and the SNP are trying to use to bring forth some kind of further election over independence, to say, well, we can't operate as a state because we can't pass our own laws. So here we go. I think it's indicative of how little thought and consideration goes into these types of legislation, in that the attempt to include what I would consider to be very, very reasonable safeguardings against bad actors have been voted down. It's just it's a horrific, really stupid piece of legislation.
Yeah, and I'm keen to just elaborate on that point slightly because, you know, look, if somebody feels as though, you know, or they're in the wrong body or they want to make those decisions, then, you know, I don't really think many people should have anything wrong with that. I don't think it's any of their business. But if people are concerned that there are loopholes that could be used for bad actors, then everyone has a right to be concerned about that. And I'm not sure those loopholes need to exist, do they? And currently, right now, if I was some kind of, you know, sex criminal living north of the border, it would be quite easy for me to become a woman and enter women's spaces, wouldn't it? Unnecessarily easy, some would say.
Well, yeah. What can I say? There are many documented instances of men who've been convicted of sexual crimes who have manipulated themselves into women's spaces, into rape shelters, into women's prisons by claiming these types of transgender identity, and women in the most vulnerable circumstances have become collateral damage.
Yeah, just lastly, sorry, Randa, to rush you on this one, but just lastly, I'm concerned obviously about women's rights, but also about children, really, because this is a massive life decision and one that could have serious consequences one way or the other. And making it easier for children to change their gender, could that pose an issue, do you think?
It's absolutely terrible. This has been pushed by, well, this change in legislation has been pushed by groups which claim to take on the interests of LGBT individuals. And the reality is that the sorts of children who are looking to change gender are likely children who will turn out to be lesbians or gay men. And what's actually happening here by changing gender is that they are becoming ersatz heterosexuals. So this is not in the interests of lesbians or gay men either. In fact, it's not even in the interests of what we used to call transsexuals. If the legal status of a transsexual had any meaning at all, it's about to be vaporised.
Miranda, thank you very, very much. I really always appreciate your insight on that. And if I don't see you before, I hope you have a wonderful Christmas as well. Miranda Yardy there is a human rights activist. Grief, well, there's a lot taking place north of the border, isn't there? We will return to that a little bit later on. But back to what some would argue is maybe the main issue of the day, I suppose, the most directly pressing issue of the day, and that is that Health Secretary Steve Barclay has accused healthcare unions of consciously inflicting harm on patients by undertaking their planned strike action. Ambulance workers have walked out on their first day of the planned two-day strike period, with the majority of NHS trusts declaring a critical incident. Well, look, the blame game is in full swing, so we might as well hop on board that particular bandwagon. I am keen to know who you blame for the situation we're in at the moment. If, and we hope it doesn't happen, but if people come to serious harm. With me now is political commentator Matthew Stadler and former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie. So you already know this one's going to go particularly spicy, I would imagine. Matthew, I will start with you. Who is to blame for this particular situation? Is it the unions or is it Steve Barclay and co?
I certainly don't think it's the unions, or to be more precise, I certainly don't think it's the ambulance drivers, the paramedics, the people who devote their lives, dedicate their lives to serving the public, serving Kelvin, serving you, Patrick, it's serving me and all our families. I think that the government has to do a lot more than it has done so far. It needs to get around the negotiating table. It seems to me that the reason they're not doing that is because they're terrified of a domino effect. If they give in to the nurses, if they give in to ambulance workers, then will they have to give in to postal workers? Will they have to give in to train drivers and people who work on the railways generally? But they've got to do more, particularly in an area of society that matters as crucially as the health service. Because if they don't, people will die.
Well, that's it. But talking about people dying, Kelvin, if someone's poor elderly mother is in a crumpled heap at the bottom of the stairs and there's no ambulance there, or a woman goes into labour, which is apparently a Category 3, Must have been a man who designed that policy, but it's a Category 3, apparently, a woman in Labour, and no ambulance. I think people might be inclined to blame the strikers.
Well, I think the issue is the most disgusting aspect I've seen of these negotiations between unionised people and NHS and the ambulance trusts, of which, by the way, the unions, unison ones, are all run by communists anyway. I mean, it is an absolute shocker. I'm sure your viewers will be astonished, as I was, to discover that one of them has just been kicked out of the Labour Party for being way too far left. And the other person, the general secretary of the thing, I think it's Unison, in fact, is a former communist herself. I mean, the whole thing it's all far left nonsense. The danger is the idea that you negotiate case by case. Literally, when the phone goes, say, well, what is that? They've got 2 broken legs and their arm has fallen off. No, we can't turn out for that. Oh, they've had a multiple serious heart attack. Yeah, we'll do that. It is an absolute disgrace that they will even think about doing. And the idea, as your other commentator points out, that, in fact, we all rely on it. The reason we rely on this clapped-out, useless NHS is because we pay a huge amount of money and tax towards it, and I don't want to pay any more for it, and actually I don't want them to earn any more money, and if they all work out, fantastic. The system will be 10 times better than the system that exists today.
Matthew, your views?
I think in the case of the nurses, and quite possibly in the case of the ambulance workers, this is an existential cry for help from the NHS. I was engaging with a very senior doctor just a couple of days ago, getting her view. She's working on the front line, and her view is that doctors, in a way, have been complicit in the degradation of the NHS over the past few years because they have been prepared to work way beyond or significantly beyond what they should be having to do in order to keep the service running. And as a consequence of that, she feels the service is now at a tipping point where they are unable to deliver the sort of service that they need to do and that we all need them to do. So we have to listen to people who, unlike Kelvin, unlike me, unlike you, Patrick, have dedicated their lives to keeping people alive. If they are making this sort of cry for help, rather than blaming them, we should look at why are they screaming so loudly and demanding help. Our society doesn't work at the moment. At the last count, there are 177 billionaires in the UK alone. Together, £653 billion is in the hands of 177 people. When you think of what the nurses are asking and what that adds to, it's a fraction of that. Britain isn't working, just as Kelvin will remember. Labour, he would claim, was working in the late 1970s.
OK, Kelvin, look, some people are saying, well, the ambulances already aren't hitting their particular timings for people. It's already not a particularly good service at all. Maybe this dispute over pay is just designed to line their pockets, won't actually improve the quality of care at all.
Well, that goes back to the argument about whether the NHS is worth saving in the first place, and on the issue of the NHS workers all flogging themselves to death for the future of mankind. I don't buy that at all. Yes, there are some hardworking people there. There's some idle people there. For instance, they take an extra 3 weeks sick off over a year, right? The average nurse makes 40 grand a year. That's NHS digital. Look, I totally accept you've got doctors who are now claiming that they're all overworked. The GP, I know one GP, does 2 days a week, does 2 12-hour days, gets 2/3 of the money, makes 66,000. When they ask, well, why don't you work a bit harder? Her response is, I want to be with my kids. I understand this, but it can't be solved by a state-run health system, which clearly is no longer working.
OK, Matthew, if you were in the same position, let's say you're on 34 grand a year, your job was as a paramedic, you had some form of payoff roughly around the 4% mark, do you think now, today, morally, if you got a phone call to say that an elderly lady had broken her hip and was at the bottom of the stairs, would you break that picket line? Would you hop in your ambulance and go and help or not? Would you have solidarity?
Listen, I will repeat the point that I haven't dedicated my life to public service. I've been a journalist. I've tried to work for the BBC for 9 years. I've tried to do my bit, but I haven't put myself on the line in the way that these guys have, right? And so the answer to your question is, if I were in that position, if I had been as generous as these people have with their lives and earned as little as they've earned, then well, I wouldn't be in that position, but I would actually go and pick up an elderly person. But I think it would be disingenuous of me to criticise these people because they've done what you and Kelvin and I have not done with their lives, and that is keep elderly people alive every day of the week.
OK, very lastly, and literally I've got 30 seconds max with you, Kelvin. Would you give them any more money whatsoever?
No, I wouldn't, but I'd make sure that their next pay round dealt with the inflation that followed. They got the money because there wasn't any inflation in the February. There will be inflation this February. They'll do just great. Just grit your teeth. The money will come to you.
OK, well, there you go. That's what you call a ding-dong debate, people. You love to see it. Matthew Stadlin there, political commentator, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. One blames the ambulance workers in a sense, and the other person blames, of course, the government. And that's where we're at as a nation these days, like a bear pit, isn't it? There we go. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Thank you very much, everybody. I am about to shoot off. I think maybe I'll show you some weather. Probably, why not? But we've got loads more coming your way. We've got more on the ambulance strikes. And, of course, as well, I'll be talking about the fact there might be offshore processing as well as Rwanda flies taking off. And did you know if you're a Scottish child, you can just be a woman now, despite the fact you were born a man? Have that.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Now, coming up, the General Secretary of Unison says the public should be able to see through the government's aggressive tactics. That's Christina McCannay's comments coming as thousands of ambulance workers gather at picket lines across the country as they walk out, mainly over pay, also about conditions. In Scotland, nurses have overwhelmingly rejected the latest pay offer from the Scottish Government. But get this, people, because a YouGov poll suggests the majority, an overwhelming majority of Brits, support the strikes, both with nurses and with ambulance workers. Do you agree, though? I want to hear from you, get those views coming in. And the old immigration disaster rears its head yet again. Rwanda might be back on the table, and this afternoon, though, it does look like offshore processing might be too. Cruise ships for migrants, apparently. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, will bring us the very latest on that. We are going north of the border in Scotland because controversial gender reforms are likely to pass at Holyrood today. You will not believe the finer points of this, ladies and gentlemen. Strong allegations are being rushed through whilst one of Nicola Sturgeon's opponents is away on maternity leave. Layers to unpack there. But if it does go through, it means that 15-year-old children will be able to begin the process of changing their gender under SNP trans laws. And indeed, in order to do so as well, they'll only have to have lived as the other sex for a couple of months, for example. I mean, what could possibly go wrong there, people? What could go wrong? Let me know your thoughts. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Before that, it is your latest headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Well, ambulance unions have been reacting angrily after the government accused them of making a conscious choice to harm patients by striking across England and Wales. Steve Barclay claims unions are refusing to work within the government at a national level over how they're going to cover emergency calls during strike action. Well, Unite's Sharon Graham says his comments are a blatant lie and an embarrassment for him and the government. And the GMB union has called the comments insulting. Unison's General Secretary Christina McCannay says Mr Barclay doesn't even want to negotiate.
We sit down in a room, you have a bit of give and take on both sides, but I'm getting nothing from him or from this government. All they're saying to me is we can't negotiate about pay. And where does that leave us? One of the reasons the ambulance service, the NHS, is in such a dire state is because they haven't invested in the workforce. So people leave, those who are left are under increasing pressure. These people don't get meal breaks. They hardly get a day off. They work excessive overtime because it's the only way the service can run.
Well, for his part, the Health Secretary maintains the government is trying to work constructively with the trade unions.
Clearly, we will need to look at the data from today to see whether the exemptions that the trade unions have promised materialise. They've said, on the one hand, they want to cause maximum disruption, but on the other hand, that they don't want to cause harm to patients. So we've tried to work constructively with the trade unions, but of course, if we see significant patient harm, then as a government we will need to look at what is done in terms of minimum service levels.
Well, paramedic Paul Turner says despite today's action, patients should feel safe and striking workers are still responding to emergencies.
We have responded to the life and limb calls that have come in. So as far as we're concerned, there's been no issue to patient care today. What is amazing today, though, is the amount of calls that we normally see coming in, we aren't seeing today. Those calls are significantly lower than what we normally do. And therefore, today, you know, these patients will be getting better treatment than what they do any other day.
Meanwhile, nurses in Scotland will announce strike dates in the new year. That's after the Royal College of Nursing members overwhelmingly rejected the latest pay deal on the table from the Scottish Government. 82% voted against the offer, which ministers said would ensure staff in Scotland remain the best paid NHS workers in the UK. Now, a man who admitted murdering his pregnant partner and 3 children in Derbyshire will spend the rest of his life in jail. Damien Bendel was given a whole life order for killing Terry Harris, her children Lacey and John Paul Bennett, and Lacey's friend Connie Gent with a claw hammer in Killamarsh in September last year. The 32-year-old also pleaded guilty to raping one of the children. The prosecutor told the court they were brutal, vicious and cruel attacks on a defenceless woman and young children. Now, the Home Secretary says the government is actively considering the use of cruise ships to house asylum seekers. Suella Braverman says the vessels, along with disused holiday parks and former student halls, are among options being looked at to help reduce the reliance on hotels. She told the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee hotels are an acceptable cost to the taxpayer and alternative sites are needed. The Home Secretary also addressed the delay in sending migrants to Rwanda.
We are returning people almost every week to various countries around the world. We do that through scheduled flights, we charter flights. So we're in a variety of discussions with several airlines for lots of different destinations. When it comes to Rwanda, at the moment, the delivery of Rwanda, i.e. removing people to Rwanda, is on pause. It's on hold whilst we are going through litigation.
Suella Braverman. Now, a man has pleaded not guilty to the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. The 9-year-old was shot by a gunman who chased a convicted burglar into her home in Liverpool in August. Olivia's family was in Liverpool Crown Court when Thomas Cashman appeared via video link. Some of them were seen shaking their heads as pleas were entered. Now, the High Court has ruled the government's post-Brexit settlement scheme, which would demand EU citizens reapply for the right to live and work in the UK, is unlawful. The Independent Monitoring Authority, a body set up to oversee citizens' rights, argued Britain is breaching its withdrawal agreement with the EU. Home Office Minister Simon Murray says the government intends to appeal the ruling. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Now, back to our top story today as the battle between the government and NHS staff rumbles on. This afternoon, unions have reacted furiously to comments by the Health Secretary about thousands of striking ambulance workers in this bitter dispute over pay and conditions. So Steve Barclay says that unions made, I'm quoting now, a conscious choice to inflict harm on patients. That's an upping of the rhetoric, but people seem to be following the advice to only contact emergency services if strictly necessary. So the number of people phoning 999 appears to have dropped in some parts of England. I've got to be honest with you, my initial reaction to that was actually one of concern, which is that, you know, are there now elderly or vulnerable people out there who are thinking, oh, I don't want to burden them, so I won't call them, and actually they're dying in their own homes, but we'll have to wait and see. Connor Swanwick is a paramedic for East Midlands Ambulance Service. He's been speaking to us at a picket line in Nottingham.
We're losing so many staff because they just can't physically afford to stay in the job. I've had friends leave this year alone that have gone to be delivery drivers, working somewhere else because they've said they can get more money and better hours with it, and they just can't keep providing for their families with it. And as a result, that's what it comes down to. It's the money that people need to live, and that's why people had to stop today, because we can't keep going like this. We can't keep providing a safe service for people if everyone's leaving and they can't stay in the jobs. We go into life-threatening emergencies and hearing the radio broadcasts for uncovered Category 1 calls, those life-threatening conditions, followed by just a deafening silence where no one's able to shout up and go, I'm free, send me to it, I'll help. And it's soul-destroying to know that there are people out there begging for help, and we just physically have no staff to go because people can't afford to stay in the job. And if they need an ambulance will be sent. There's a safe level of staffing put in today. We've worked with the organisations to make sure that we're not understaffed, that people are still able to go to those life-threatening emergencies where possible.
OK, well, there we go. It's very much split the viewership here, even if the opinion polls appear to overwhelmingly support ambulance strikes. Around 63% of the public, according to a YouGov poll, are apparently in favour of these strikes. And Michael's been on, he says, I am not comfortable with strikes, but I support these ones. However, Kathy, for example, says they should be ashamed of themselves. People are dying. No strikes under any circumstances for paramedics. So that's kind of where we're at as a country, actually. I think the strike action comes with a backdrop of extreme pressure on the NHS and the ambulance services. And this afternoon, we are hearing that almost all of the ambulance trusts in England are at such a level of disruption that the environment might not even be considered safe and patients might face harm. So, yeah, shock horror. You go on strike and patients face harm. I mean, yeah, fine, but there we go. The majority have declared so-called critical incidents, with many trusts stating they were facing huge pressure even before today's strike. So a critical incident, apparently, is defined by the NHS as any localised incident where the level of disruption results in the organisation temporarily or permanently losing its ability to deliver critical services, so unable to deliver critical services. Critical incidents have been declared at Yorkshire Ambulance Service, North East Ambulance Service, South East Coast Ambulance Service, East of England Ambulance Service, South Central Ambulance Service, South Western Ambulance Service, North West Ambulance Service. I think that's it, is it? There we go. Right, gosh, well, it's quite enough, actually. I'm glad that's it. But anyway, a YouGov poll, though, has found that despite this, though, it's crumbling patients' care and all of this stuff, but most people are backing it. And here are some more figures, because 63% of people back ambulance workers on strike today, with nurses who walked out yesterday and a few days before that having even more support. 65% of people supporting their cause. What is fascinating, though, is when you look down the list there at the rail strikers, they have dropped below the 50% mark, which is probably why Mick Lynch has chosen today to go and meet up rather secretly with some train providers to try to barter. There, a bit under the radar, but there we go. Let me welcome GB News viewers, Miranda Richardson, who's in Northampton, and Alan McNeely, who's in Grimsby. Both of you, welcome, welcome. Miranda, I will start with you. Who do you blame for these strikes? Who would you blame if people sadly died as a result?
It wouldn't be the ambulance service, I know that much. My father was a paramedic for over 25 years. I've seen firsthand what that does to a family. They are working under such horrendous conditions and really tough conditions. These people do this job because it's a vocation. That's why they become paramedics. That's why they become technicians. That's what they want to do. Fundamentally, they want to save and look after people. When you're then put in a position that you can't even look after your family at home because the money you bring in can't help them survive, you have to look at what works for you and your family and your network around you. So that's why if they are leaving the service, it's a really tough decision. They don't just decide it. It's not just a job. You know, when people say, oh, you know, well, it doesn't matter that they're getting so much money for turning out to an RTC or a suicide, that's their job. Yes, it is. And we'd be in a really worse position if those people didn't choose to want to become paramedics and technicians. That's one of the first things we have to think of.
I'll stop you there, Miranda, because I'll come back to you, Miranda. I'll come back to you. Good points there. Alan, your views on this. I know the money issue is a tough one because we've got inflation, etc. Look, I'm hearing that the average is about 34 grand. It very much depends which report you read when it comes to the average salary. It's hard to tell because they've got such a sliding scale. I did speak to a paramedic earlier on, Alan, who said that he was quite newly qualified into it. He didn't think he was struggling too much financially. Do you think that actually money should be a consideration when it comes to patient and public health?
Good afternoon, Patrick. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas.
It's quite a hard one because they have quite a difficult job, and the ambulance drivers and the paramedics aren't particularly well paid. They are if they've been in employment for a while, but it's not a great wage. So I don't have a problem with them asking for more money, which the government, I believe, has offered them. I'm not exactly sure what kind of settlement that they actually want. Is it the 20% that the nurses want? Is it 10%? I haven't really heard that information, so it's quite difficult to say, Patrick.
Yeah, well, this is it, and I will just come back, Miranda, on that. I did have a 999 call handler on yesterday, and I was trying to ask her quite straightforwardly, really, which was, what money are you on now? OK, I get that's a bit of a personal question, but what was the pay offer that was offered? She said it was around the 4%, 4.5% mark. I said, well, what do you want? And she just said, well, I'm going to leave that to the unions. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. If the unions are a bit militant or politically motivated, then actually that undermines the argument, doesn't it, really? I mean, we do seem a little bit unable to find out what these striking workers actually want. They just go, well, a living wage. Well, some would say they're already on a living wage. Your views, Miranda?
Yeah, you know, again, it's that kind of aspect of what do they want and what have they narrowed it down to. the unions are there for a reason, like them or not, militant or not. They are there to try and help a collective. There are hundreds of thousands of paramedics and technicians in the country. You know, you have to kind of try and get some sort of central force to be able to deal and look after them and protect them and protect what they're trying to do and achieve. So it is tough because sometimes the unions, it's like anything, they're going to go in wanting more. Like anybody, and that way you end up bartering down to a number that suits all, you know. And actually, for individuals to say, do you know what, let my union deal with that for me, that's sometimes the only way to go.
OK, Alan, and Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, has been quite strong today, actually, saying that unions are deliberately targeting the patients, trying to cause, I'm paraphrasing here, but as much harm as possible, really. Do you think there is any truth in that? Because that's a bit grim, if it is true.
Well, I've heard sort of both sides of the story. I heard the union side and the government side. And again, it's extremely hard to know. I wouldn't support them striking. I don't think they should be striking because of the role that they play in society. I would support them looking for more money because I don't think that they're particularly well paid. And regardless of who slings mud at who, the fact is that the very fact that they are striking will put people at risk, and there's no getting away from that. If they can't respond to different levels of calls, some people will be put at risk. Perhaps some people will die, and that's just going to be a fact. So I blame the unions, because the unions should be round the table talking to the government about where they want to be, whereas the unions seem very keen just to go out on strike. Well, the government have offered us this, we're not taking that, so we're going on strike. And that seems to be, you know, instantaneous.
Yeah, and I suppose when it comes down to that pay issue, Miranda, a lot of people are very concerned that it doesn't really matter how much money you lob at the NHS, it never seems to end up where it needs to be, and we don't seem to end up getting too much bang for our buck. Some people would say that. I'm just going to ask you both the same question, but I'll start with you, Miranda. Are you concerned about getting ill today, or relatives getting ill today, more than you would be normally?
Not at all. And one of the main reasons being, at the moment, if you have an incident and you ring for an ambulance, they're under that much pressure. The very first question is the patient breathing? That's the first question. Is the patient breathing and they're conscious? Okay. You know? And so we've got incidents where people now are waiting 7, 12 hours for an ambulance, as it is, because areas are under so much pressure.
That's the thing.
Regardless of striking.
Yeah, they're saying that they're already missing waiting times and arrival times. Exactly.
They're sat outside because the A&Es are so full. They're sat outside as mobile beds with people in the back of ambulances because we can't deal with it. Them saying today that the numbers are down, sorry, Patrick, just quickly, saying the numbers are down and it's less, that's because people are going, I can't treat it like an NHS, you know, dropping GP service today, so I'll ring tomorrow, it'll be fine.
Well, I'm worried about that, Miranda. I am worried about that, Miranda. I tell you what, Alan, very, very quickly, mate, very quickly on this. I will actually ask you a slightly different one, because I think that's a cracking point Miranda's made there. We're hearing reports that 999 calls are down. My concern, my first reaction to that was, I really hope there's not a load of poor old ladies and men out there who are actually ill, who think, you know, as a lot of lovely members of our elderly community do, they go, oh, I wouldn't want to add to the stress. And that, for me, is a concern. And you know, how do you think about that? Do you suspect that actually people are deliberately not calling now and maybe they need to?
Well, there's a definite possibility there, Patrick, that could happen. But I also would agree with Miranda, who said that lots of people call 999 for absolutely no reason whatsoever. I've always been of the opinion that if you need to go to hospital and you can make your way to hospital, you should do so. But it is possible that there will be people who would be concerned, thinking, well, there's no point in calling an ambulance because I'm not going to get one. I mean, it's very hard to say on that.
It's true. And both of you, thank you very much. And I'll just leave you with this, actually, and I think this is a slightly unpalatable thing to say, but maybe this is something that highlights it, which is perhaps a public information campaign about, please, for the love of God, just in normal life, not when they're on strikes, really do think twice about whether you need that ambulance. You know, there are a lot of people out there who I think do use and abuse the NHS, and that needs to stop. Maybe that's a way of cutting back on stuff. But anyway, there we go. That's a very it's a minefield to traipse our way through. But you've done it well there. Thank you very much, GB News viewers. Miranda Richardson, who's in Northampton, and Alan McNeely, who's in Grimsby. Right, we're going to go back now. We've had the views of the viewers. We've heard from someone on a picket line. We're going to go to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, now, who's in Westminster, to get the political angle on this. Darren, look, obviously I want to know what the latest from Steve Barclay is, but can I ask, I haven't heard too much from Labour today. Are they getting involved at all?
Well, I mean, they've got a pretty stated position that hasn't really changed, and are they getting involved? Frankly, they're not really. I mean, MPs have broken up, must be said, for the Christmas break. There's not many politicians around here in Westminster. In fact, I've just been into Parliament and I counted the number of MPs I saw on my hands. But Labour, Labour and all of this are suggesting essentially that what they want to do is see the government get around the negotiating table. Now, interestingly, they actually agree with the government that it is not possible to give the unions the pay rises that many of them are looking for. What they do want to see from the government is an attempt at least to try and get a negotiated settlement. The government's point of view on all of that is that there is an independent pay body. It is already set the pay settlements for the next year, and that is something that the unions themselves should agree to, and they can look into the future about whether things may need to change. Now, for the unions, of course, they want to see a different approach to this. They want to see pay very much on the table. Their argument repeatedly has been that, frankly, that pay body review report into how much they should get paid was set before we saw inflation hit double digits and is not reflective of the current economic environment. In terms of where the government, though, are today, they're not engaging with the unions in any formal talks. What they have been doing, though, is meeting here at Westminster to talk about contingency plans. We saw a COBRA meeting in Whitehall a little bit earlier, in which ministers from across government departments talked about how they could mitigate some of the consequences of the strikes, particularly with the paramedics. We've seen some members of the armed forces involved in that. We may well see it again, actually, when we see strike action by Border Force guards this weekend. But what we have seen is this war of words, you're right, between the government and the unions. Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, really up in the ante in the last 24 hours, in which he said that the unions had taken a conscious choice to inflict harm on patients at the worst possible time, i.e. ahead of Christmas, at a time in which flu and COVID remain a very, very serious threat to the National Health Service. Unions very, very angry about that. They called it, a blatant lie that the unions have done this. And if anything, the two sides seem further apart than at any stage in this process, and there is no sign these strikes are going to come to an end anytime soon. If anything, it looks almost certain we'll get more strike dates into the new year.
Yeah, indeed. No wonder what those opinion polls are going to do if those strikes do actually continue. Darren, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster. Loads of you getting in touch on this. I'm asking, who do you think is at fault if people sadly die as a result of the strikes? And at the moment in the inbox anyway, which is not a representation of the latest YouGov poll, it must be said, who's 63% of whom are bang in favour of ambulance strikes. People like Ray is saying, hang on a minute, this is actually the fault of the unions. They've called the strike, not the government. It's all very silly. The NHS is a failure. Keep your views coming in. By the way, in terms of pay, it's very difficult to actually get the exact facts and figures when it comes to it. But roughly, on average, between £28,000 and £34,000 from the research that I can do here online, it's for a paramedic, and NHS call handlers between £21,000 and £25,000. They have apparently been offered a 4% pay rise. What do you make of that? Do you think that is enough money? Is that a living wage? Do you think that actually warrants essentially going on strike and potentially leaving people who are having a stroke not getting care? Your views, GB Views at gbnews.uk. Coming up there, controversial plans to process some migrants offshore in cruise ships could be back on the water, people, because our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, will bring you the very latest on that. We had Rwanda, now we might have P&O migrants. Back in a moment.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel. Welcome back, everybody. Now, the Home Secretary has confirmed the government is actively considering the use of cruise ships to accommodate asylum seekers, giving evidence to the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee. Suella Braverman confirmed that as well as disused holiday parks and military sites, the use of vessels is also being assessed. The Home Secretary defended the use of private contractors to find asylum seeker accommodation. That's over allegations that they are making an absolute wedge of cash. Mark Wyatt joins me in the studio right now. Mark, let's start with the cruise ships. People have been calling this for a very, very long time. Offshore processing, so people coming across the channel, well, what, I suppose barely set foot in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, many people have seen this as a potential deterrent because if people are determined to reach UK soil, they don't get to UK soil, they're effectively processed offshore, then that could, in the eyes of those who support the cruise ship option, act as a deterrent. Well, although people had mentioned cruise ships for some considerable time, the British government has never said it was actively considering that as an option. But Suella Braverman has now said that in evidence she has given to this Home Affairs Committee in the Lords, saying that as well as considering the likes of former holiday parks, student accommodation, military sites, then cruise ships are also a potential option. This is what she told the committee.
And as you heard from the PM, we will bring forward a range of alternative sites, and they will include disused holiday parks, former student halls are sites. Well, I should say we are looking at those sites. I wouldn't say anything's confirmed yet, but we need to bring forward thousands of places. And when you talk about vessels, I would just say, and all I can say, because we are in discussions with a wide variety of providers, that everything is still on the table.
Well, that's fascinating, because I think this would tie into a multiple-pronged approach when it comes to the migrant crisis. People saying, well, the idea of being put on a flight to Rwanda might not act as that much of a deterrent on its own in isolation. If you then couple that with the fact that you might be processed on some kind of cruise ship offshore so then never set foot in the UK, is it all starting to come together for the government?
I wouldn't go that far. We haven't had a single flight take off for Rwanda as yet. We've got the High Court now saying that it's lawful. That's a step forward. But that's going to be subject to an appeal. So it could be tied up in more legal wrangling for some considerable time. Will the government have the backbone to get some people on a flight and to Rwanda in the interim? There's no sign that that's happening, and Rishi Sunak, when he was pushed on this, wouldn't commit to there being any flights taking off before Christmas.
No, you mentioned backbone there. That's been a thing that I think a lot of people have been up in arms about for a very, very long time. I am desperately not looking forward to the optics of military barracks being used, disused military barracks being used, whilst we have homeless military veterans as well. I mean, I think that will go down like a cup of cold sick with the vast majority of the British public, certainly the patriotic British public anyway. But the government will need a backbone to deal with people saying, well, we'll be against people's human rights to put them on a cruise ship, even if those cruise ships are the ones that normal people would pay to go on.
Well, of course, what you get when there is a policy of trying to put as many people together as possible in a centre or, you know, a former military base like RAF Linton or News up in Yorkshire is understandable concern in the community, especially if it's a small community, a village like Linton or News, which was going to see its population expand from 500 to about 2,000, 1,500 of them being young male asylum seekers with one village shop. Well, it's bonkers. That's one element of concern. But then on the other side, you've got all those representing and looking after the interests of asylum seekers who claim that these sites are not suitable for asylum seekers and that they're living in effectively squalid conditions.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it? Because we would have paratroops in there, we would have members of the military in there, we would have paying customers in the case of cruise ships in there, but of course maybe they're not good enough for some people.
Well, I would suggest that they're probably considerably less squalid than the makeshift encampments that they were in around Calais and Dunkirk, some of them for months at a time.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much. As ever, Mark White, there, our home and security editor, bringing you the latest. Yes, your ears and eyes are not deceiving you. We may actually be about to have cruise ships, presumably in the Channel, anyway, for these people to be processed offshore. Your thoughts on all of that. But coming up, controversial gender reforms are likely to pass in Holyrood today, as if we hadn't had enough madness. If it does, then 15-year-old children will be able to begin the process of changing their gender under SNP trans laws. They will make it a lot easier for them to do so. It would also mean, as well, in addition, by the way, that people who are currently undergoing trial for things like rape could then claim to be women and be put in women's prisons. I mean, obviously, nothing could possibly go wrong here. Now it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Hello to you. The top story this hour. Ambulance unions have reacted angrily after the government accused them of making a conscious choice to harm patients by going out on strike.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? Where?
Well, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, claims unions are refusing to work with the government at a national level on how they cover emergencies during strike action. Unite's Sharon Graham says the comments are a blatant lie and an embarrassment for him and the government. And the GMB union has called the comments insulting. The Unison's General Secretary, Christine McAnear, says Mr Barclay doesn't want to negotiate.
We sit down in a room, you have a bit of give and take on both sides. But I'm getting nothing from him or from this government. All they're saying to me is, we can't negotiate about pay. And where does that leave us? One of the reasons the ambulance service, the NHS, is in such a dire state is because they haven't invested in the workforce. So people leave. Those who are left are under increasing pressure. These people don't get meal breaks. They hardly get a day off. They work excessive overtime because it's the only way the service can run.
Now, a man who admitted murdering his pregnant partner and 3 children in Derbyshire will spend the rest of his life in jail. Damien Bendel was given a whole life order for killing Terry Harris, her children Lacey and John Paul Bennett, and Lacey's friend Connie Gent with a claw hammer in Killamarsh in September last year. The 32-year-old also pleaded guilty to raping one of the children. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says the government's actively considering the use of cruise ships to house asylum seekers. Suella Braverman says the vessels, along with disused holiday parks and former student halls, are among options being looked at to help reduce the reliance on hotels. She told the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee hotels are an unacceptable cost to the taxpayer and alternative sites are needed. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Don't go anywhere. Back in a tick.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. Right now, the Scottish Parliament has been debating whether children as young as 16 should be able to change their legal gender this afternoon. MSPs are considering whether to remove certain hurdles to changing gender, which are specified in the 2004 Gender Recognition Act. There's a lot to unpack here. Let's try and do it. If the bill is passed, those wanting to change their designated gender will no longer need a doctor's diagnosis of gender dysphoria, so they can just do it themselves, decide themselves. They'll also need to have lived in their chosen gender for just 3 months. That's down from 2 years. Trans rights activists have been outside Holyrood throughout the day, urging MSPs to back the new gender reform bill. Earlier, transgender rights activist Beth Douglas explained why the bill is so important to her.
Bill does is it allows trans people to do two things. It allows us to update our birth certificate. Now, there's two reasons why you might want to do that. Is to make sure that your marriage certificate is in the right gender. So when you have your special day, is to make sure that while your ceremony isn't going on, that you're not misgendered on your big day, which I think is a very low ask. The other one, which this is more personal to me, and this is why I want a GRC, is so that eventually unfortunately, we all pass away. We have a limited time on this earth, and there will be a day for everyone where our death certificate gets issued. Now, when that happens for me, I would like that death certificate to be true to how I lived my life. I would like it to be in the right gender. I would like it to say the correct information on it, because I would like to rest in peace and die with a little bit of dignity, and that's what a GRC means to me. That's why I want one.
Right. Well, joining me now is former SNP councillor Austin Sheridan. Austin, I've got to ask you, it seems bizarre to me that the SNP are having hours and hours long debates on this. They've got to rush this through as a matter of urgency. Why do they think this is such an urgent thing?
Well, the reason that it's taken so long to go through Parliament is because the opposition parties, in particular the Conservative Party, have put up amendments and to the bill. 150 amendments have had to be debated, and that's thanks to the Tories. So it certainly wouldn't have been debated as long as it has been if it hadn't been for them. But the reason that this is important to go through is because this isn't rushed by any stretch of the imagination. This has been something that's been going through the Scottish Parliament for 6 years. It's something that has been heavily consulted upon to make sure that we do get the legislation right, because it is important that when we're passing this kind of legislation, that we need to make sure that we get it right, because it is a very sensitive area, and we've got to be respectful of all people on all sides of the debate.
Why is it that when you look at the percentage of people who this would affect, right, which is a fraction of a percentage of people who are in that trans community, some would argue that their rights now are being prioritised over the rights of women to have their own spaces. Is this only taking place now because it's fashionable to be pro-trans?
Absolutely not. I mean, for example, when equal marriage was passed in Scotland back in 2014, as a gay man, I suppose I'm a fraction of society, but I certainly...
Yeah, but you're a lot more.
National Parliament.
You're a lot... but with respect... No, sorry, there is a massive difference there, though, mate. There is a massive difference, right? Because if now, as it stands, right, if me as a man, if I was a rapist, I could identify as a woman and live as a woman for a couple of months and be designated as a woman and go into a woman's prison. And that is very different from same-sex marriage.
Right. So first of all, I think that when we're looking at people that commit sex offences, and this is something that in this debate, that in particular male transitioning to female have been a particular target in this debate by critics. I mean, when people are going to commit sex offences, they don't change their gender to do so. That's the number one thing. Another thing as well is that anyone has the right now to live the gender that they wish to live at any age. So there is no age restrictions on that, and anyone can choose to do so. What this legislation does is it allows people to change their gender on the birth certificate. But right now, if you went to your bank, even on your passport, you can have your name changed on those documents without having a gender recognition certificate. So I think we have to be clear about what the legislation actually means, because I've seen a lot of things being muddied in the water about access to women's only spaces. I mean, this legislation does not impede on the Equality Act of 2010, which protects single-sex spaces. And organisations, for example, rape crisis organisations, it would be up to them to make the decision about who would be allowed in that space and who wouldn't be. So those things are respected, and it's quite right that they are too.
When you're seeing now increasing evidence to suggest that people who do transition during childhood or in their more formative years, sometimes that's down to the fact, or a contributory factor is to do with things like mental health problems that they're undergoing at that particular time. Autism is also very prevalent in that, and a decision that they can come to regret later down the line. Why are you so concerned about making it easier for them to make a decision that they may well live to regret?
Well, I certainly don't want to go about making life difficult for people, and that's exactly where we are with current legislation. It makes things very difficult. It means that people can be misgendered. For example, when it does come to marriage, when it does come to death. I mean, I don't see why we would want to go out our way to make life difficult. In terms for those who transition and then regret it, I'm sure there are some people, but very, very, very rarely do we come across cases like that.
Okay.
Very rarely.
Do you believe that you could be a woman?
Well, I don't feel like a woman. I don't want to be a woman. I'm perfectly comfortable being a man.
What does it mean to feel like a woman?
I don't know, because I'm not a woman. I mean, I feel like a man. So, I mean, if somebody says to me, you know, what's it like to be trans? Well, how could I possibly answer that? Because I'm not trans. You're probably better directing that question towards somebody who's going through that lived experience. What I would say, though, is that although that I may not understand what it's like to feel that way, that certainly they have my full support. It would just be like asking a heterosexual man, what's it like to be gay? I know what it's like to be gay. They wouldn't, but I certainly wouldn't. I think it cuts down. I think it's more into. I think it's more down to the.
I think it's more down to the root thing there of thinking that someone who is biologically male, could ever really have been born into the wrong body. I mean, do you honestly think that babies are sometimes born and they have just got the wrong genitalia?
Yeah, I mean, I know trans people, and they believe that the bodies that they were born into were not the ones that they should have had. And yeah, I certainly believe that can be the case. And anyone who's transgender and who's going through transition, or you know, I will support them 100%. I mean, why wouldn't I?
Okay, interesting stuff. There are rumours that Nicola Sturgeon is trying to just rush this through while a particular one of her opponents is away on maternity leave. Is there any truth to that?
No. As I say, this is beginning through.
Oh, well. OK, he's gone. Sorry about that. Oh, well, there you go. That was, of course, former SNP councillor Austin Sheridan there. No doubt your views will be very, very important on this, so make sure that you get those into me. Well, look, we're going to move on now. With the strike season now in full flow, the government still seems to be holding firm on nurses and ambulance workers' pay demands. The RCN is reportedly asking for 5% above inflation. But when no resolution is in sight, what has the government offered in an attempt to break the deadlock? Yesterday, I spoke to an ambulance call taker who is striking today. I asked her what she would see as an acceptable pay rise. Let's just remind ourselves of what she said.
It's not my position to say that. That's for the trade unions to discuss.
Yeah, well, then you could argue, well, it's their job to just negotiate. And I mean, if you're going on strike, it means that you won't be taking a call tomorrow. If I fell down the stairs or my grandma got very ill, for example, and desperately needed an ambulance, and let's be honest, you won't be there, and it is overpay. So what do you want to be paid? What could stop you from going off? You can't just palm this off on the trade unions. You must have a view.
I don't know. How long is a piece of string? I'm just after a fair deal, and being offered a 4% is not a fair deal.
OK, so what? So somewhere in between what? 4% and what? What would, if we said 6%, would that do?
I don't know. It isn't my place to make that decision, so it's up to them to come up with a fair deal for us. That's what we're all afterwards.
Right. I think a lot of people would think if you're making the decision to go on strike, then maybe you should have a figure in mind.
I'm sure that the leaders, I'm sure that they'd all come up with some negotiations. That's what we want him. They're wanting them to come to the table to make a fair negotiation. What we've been offered is not a fair negotiation, not a fair pay rise, not for the work that's being done. The extra stretches, the extra demands being put on us, we warrant a pay rise that is fair and in just with the line that we work, that we do. That's what we're asking. We're not asking for the world. We're just asking for fair pay.
OK, well, I mean, look, I can't get around the fact that that is an ambulance call handler who would not tell us what she's been paid at the minute, would not tell us what pay rise she had been offered, said she didn't really know, and also didn't tell us what pay rise she wanted, but was certain that she had to go on strike. So there we go. Anyway, so what has been offered to striking workers, and is it even affordable for us, the taxpayer? Vicky Price is the Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. Vicky, thank you very much. Now, I am not an economist, but I want to know, is it affordable to give striking healthcare workers what they actually want? Can we afford to do that?
Oh, we probably can if we wanted to, in the sense that you can make up that money from somewhere else. You can raise taxes if you think that it's a fair increase that is being asked for by ambulance workers and the nurses. You can actually just borrow more, possibly, from the market. So you can do it. The question is whether you want to, and what the implications of doing one of those three things might be for the economy as a whole.
OK, well, talk to me about that then. So let's just say that we decide to do that. We decide to give nurses a 19% pay rise, or we settle somewhere around 15%, right? We settle somewhere around 15%, something similar for ambulance workers, call handlers and all of that jazz, right? What would the implications be for our economy there? So we've borrowed the money to do that, increased taxes to do that. What would the implication be?
Well, if we borrowed or increased taxes, those are two different things, by the way.
Yes.
If we borrowed, well, obviously we're going to have to borrow at interest rates which are considerably higher now than they were before. So that's going to add to whatever it is that we're borrowing at present. Remember that just paying public sector workers costs us about 223 billion a year, which is quite a lot of money. But of course, it's a big, big service. So we're talking now much more widely than just the National Health Service. Includes civil servants, includes various people in the rail sector. So if you give them, say, a 10% or a 15% increase, then you add to that bill. But of course, the people who will get that money are going to go out and spend some of that. So they'll pay income tax as well. And when they spend, they'll pay VAT. So you do collect quite a lot of money from that. And there is a calculation done by the Institute for Fiscal Studies that said if you account for the fact that in a number of cases, like, for example, nurses, we had already given them a certain increase during the summer. And you have already said that teachers, in particular, and other social workers could get some extra payment as well additionally, which was already allowed for in the public spending review that took place, then the increase that you're giving isn't anything like as big as had been estimated originally, overall, the extra costs. And you can, in fact, reduce it through the fact that you're going to be getting more money from income tax and VAT and so on, and there'll be more activity in the economy. You can reduce that to perhaps £8 billion extra, which, given how much we spent during COVID, is not very much. So there are all sorts of ways in which you can approach it. You can tax, of course, non-DOMs, that has been suggested. You can increase windfall taxes, widen them a little bit just from the energy sector to other sectors as well. So if there was a will to do it, you could do it. And frankly, the increase in pay that you'll be giving is going to be hugely inflationary, because certainly in the public sector, particularly in the National Health Service, you can't increase your prices at the end of the day. So it's not exactly, inflation from that point of view. It won't be reflected immediately in what you pass on to consumers.
Well, this is the line that Rishi Sunak is saying, which is that it would lead to higher inflation. You're saying that's not true.
Well, it will lead to a certain amount of inflation, without any doubt, because a lot of that money will be spent. And if you give a lot, for example, to the rail workers, then what's going to happen is that inevitably the companies are going to have to raise their prices for, rail fares and other costs that are associated with it. So that would be inflationary. And because you're spending it, then obviously you're asking for goods and services that you wouldn't have asked for before. And we know full well that the Bank of England right now is trying to reduce that type of spending by raising interest rates. So trying to reduce the growth in the economy. So what you're doing is you're encouraging more of that, but it is limited. So it's not the full-blown inflationary impact that you'd worry about if there was a serious wage price spiral. It would be a little bit milder than that.
OK, well, interesting. I'm trying to work out whether that's reassuring or not, what you've said to me there, but as most things that the Vicky Price, the Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research, as a lady with a brain the size of a planet, the vast majority of what she says goes straight over my head. But there you go. I'll let you make your own minds up about that. Thank you very much, Vicky. Right, now, this morning, this is more on my level, I think. There was a very special plane has flown terminally ill and life-limited children from Belfast to Lapland to meet the big man himself, Santa. The Northern Ireland Children to Lapland charity helps those children and their loved ones make lifelong festive memories. And our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie went along for the ride. He's gone to Lapland. Are you in Lapland?
I am, Patrick, I am. I swapped Stormont for Lapland. What a good swap that is. Although, mind you, it is absolutely freezing. But Lapland is such a place, and this charity is such a good charity. I've been involved with it for a few years, and it is about making memories for these children. And we have went looking for Santa. I mean, at the start of the morning, as you say, we got on a plane out of Belfast, a private chartered plane. We came in to the airport here. We've been on skidoos, reindeers, huskies, going across the wasteland of Finland, this highly cold, barren place, if you like. There's a load of trees on all the other side, which is quite good, but there's only 2 hours of daylight here. And when I got here, I went into the side of a mountain. This mountain is way, way down, about 200 feet down into the mountain, and there I met with Santa. What an interview that was. A pinnacle moment in my career, to be honest. The real Santa, meeting him down in there. And I asked him straight out, what should the people of UK, the children of UK and Ireland, be doing in and around Christmas Eve? Here's what he had to say.
It could be very good if they can go and sleep about at least at 9 o'clock in the evening, yeah. And then if they have a fireplace, so that they should check up that they have no fire in the fireplace on Christmas Eve.
One of our presenters now, Patrick.
Yeah.
I would like to know ahead of time, has he been on the naughty list or the nice list?
I tell you, he can take it very, very easy and sleep very well on the Christmas night because he's on the very good list.
Yes, absolutely. I'm on the very good list, Doogie.
Well, I didn't even bother asking him then, was I on the naughty or nice list? Because, I mean, if you're on the good list, there's a lot of forgiveness there, I can assure you. we will be leaving here within the next hour and heading back to Belfast for a very emotional flight home. But from Lapland, goodbye.
Doogie, this is fantastic. Oh, well done, mate. Well done. Stellar stuff, that. Doogie Beattie, our All Nine reporter, our Lapland correspondent, by the way. And wasn't it nice to see Santa there? Yes, what Doogie didn't tell you is that I actually posted him a tenner to say that I was on the very, very good list. Right, you are with me, Patrick, because he's on GB News. Loads more coming in the next hour. Nurses walking out, gender reform in Scotland, and an international newspaper claiming that Britain is institutionally racist. I will be back in a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. Right, it's 5 o'clock. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And coming up, ambulance trusts across England have reportedly received fewer 999 calls as thousands of staff and paramedics walk out. I'm wondering whether or not that's actually a good thing, though. Hopefully there's not a load of sick people out there not calling 999 because they're terrified of overburdening them. Anyway, health leaders have urged people to call for an ambulance if they're experiencing a life-threatening emergency. Today's strike involved members of the Unison, Unite and GMB unions who are calling for pay rises 5% above inflation. The government is staying resolute in its opposition to such a wage increase. We will bring you the latest on all of that. And should children as young as 16, 15 in some cases actually, be able to legally change their gender? In Scotland, they will if the SNP government gets its way. You will not believe the granular detail when it comes to all of this, by the way, because it's not just kids as well. People who are suspected of rape can actually change their gender and probably end up in a woman's prison, which is shocking stuff. Controversial gender reforms are being debated in this afternoon, and rumours are flying around that Nicola Sturgeon is trying to whiz it through, or one of her main opponents is away on maternity leave. But we'll have to bring you the latest on all of that. It'll enable people who have lived in their chosen gender for just 3 months to be legally reassigned. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. GBviews at gbnews.uk. I want to hear from you. Yeah, there's that one. There's also the fact that we are going to start potentially processing migrants offshore. I know a lot of you are very keen on that. But the big one today is, who do you blame for these ambulance strikes? GBviews at gbnews.uk. But now it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. At 5:01, the top story is that ambulance unions have reacted angrily after the government accused them of making a conscious choice to harm patients by going out on strike.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? When?
Well, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, is claiming unions are refusing to work together with the government at a national level on how paramedics will cover emergency calls during strike action. Unite's Sharon Graham says the Health Secretary's comments are a blatant lie and an embarrassment for him and the government. The GMB union has called the comments insulting, and Unison's General Secretary Christine McInerney says Mr Barclay doesn't even want to discuss pay.
We sit down in a room, you have a bit of give and take on both sides, but I'm getting nothing from him or from this government. All they're saying to me is we can't negotiate about pay. And where does that leave us? One of the reasons the ambulance service, the NHS, is in such a dire state is because they haven't invested in the workforce. So people leave, those who are left are under increasing pressure. These people don't get meal breaks. They hardly get a day off. They work excessive overtime because it's the only way the service can run.
Well, the Health Secretary, for his part, maintains the government is trying to work constructively with the trade unions.
Clearly, we will need to look at the data from today to see whether the exemptions that the trade unions have promised materialise. They've said, on the one hand, they want to cause maximum disruption, but on the other hand, that they don't want to cause harm to patients. So we've tried to work constructively with the trade unions, but of course, if we see significant patient harm, then as a government we will need to look at what is done in terms of minimum service levels.
Well, paramedic Paul Turner says despite today's strike action, patients should feel safe and that ambulance workers are responding to emergencies.
we have responded to the life and limb calls that have come in. So as far as we're concerned, there's been no issue to patient care today. What is amazing today, though, is the amount of calls that we normally see coming in, we aren't seeing today. Those calls are significantly lower than what we normally do. And therefore, today, you know, these patients will be getting better treatment than what they do any other day.
Meanwhile, nurses in Scotland will announce strike action in the new year. That's after the Royal College of Nursing members overwhelmingly rejected the latest pay deal from the Scottish Government. 82% voted against the offer, which ministers have said ensures NHS staff in Scotland remain the best paid workers in the UK. Well, in other news today, a man who admitted murdering his pregnant partner and 3 children in Derbyshire will spend the rest of his life in jail. Damien Bendel was given a whole life order for killing Terry Harris, her children Lacey and John Paul Bennett, and Lacey's friend Connie Gent with a claw hammer in Killamarsh in September last year. The prosecutor told the court they were brutal, vicious and cruel attacks on a defenceless woman and young children. Now, the Home Secretary says the government's actively considering the use of cruise ships to house asylum seekers. Suella Braverman says the vessels, along with disused holiday parks and former student halls, are all among options being looked at to help reduce the reliance on hotels. She told the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee that hotels are an unacceptable cost to the taxpayer and alternative sites are needed. The Home Secretary also addressed the delay in sending migrants to Rwanda.
We are returning people almost every week to various countries around the world. We do that through scheduled flights, we charter flights. So we're in a variety of discussions with several airlines for lots of different destinations. When it comes to Rwanda, at the moment, the delivery of Rwanda, i.e. removing people to Rwanda, is on pause. It's on hold whilst we are going through litigation.
A man has pleaded not guilty to the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. The 9-year-old little girl was shot by a gunman who chased a convicted burglar into her home in Liverpool in August. Olivia's family was at Liverpool Crown Court when Thomas Cashman appeared via video link. Some were seen shaking their heads as pleas were entered. And as you've been hearing today on GB News, the High Court has ruled the government's post-Brexit settlement scheme, which would mean EU citizens have to reapply for the right to live and work in the UK, is unlawful. The Independent Monitoring Authority, a body set up to oversee citizens' rights, argues Britain is breaching its withdrawal agreement with the EU. But Home Office Minister Simon Murray says the government intends to appeal the ruling. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick Christys.
Well, it's deadlock, ladies and gentlemen, between the unions and the government over pay for paramedics and indeed other ambulance staff. Today, ambulance workers have walked out and worries over emergency care remain as the grandmother of a 2-week-old baby boy who struggled to breathe during a 5-hour wait for an ambulance has pleaded with unions and the government as she claims lives are at risk. Earlier, I spoke to a paramedic who's not going on strike. So this guy had just come off the back of a night shift. He came here on GB News and he told me exactly why he wasn't going on strike. Tom Coffey told me the ambulance service was in a difficult state even before these strikes, and therefore patient care as well.
I'm at a hospital with a patient. We hear the radio go off frequently and they say there's no ambulances to send, and it's absolutely soul-destroying to be sat outside hospital, not being able to help people. I've got to say, with the strike action as well, it's far more of an issue than just pay alone. So many in the mainstream media, and unfortunately the unions as well, would just have you believe it's about pay. It's a far bigger issue than pay. It's the fact so much of our time is wasted sat outside hospitals, and the hospitals and the social care system really do need to work together to improve ambulance flow so we can get to those emergencies and help people and ultimately save lives. We've got to improve community services and health prevention as well, so avoiding people going to hospitals hospital in the first place, ensuring that people have got quick access to GP appointments. So if somebody can't get through to their GP, their health will naturally get worse, and then they will have to go into hospital as a result. There's lots of things that can be done, and unfortunately there's no easy answers, but I hope that we can sort of get over this. So if you are very ill, I've got no doubt that an ambulance will get to you. So please, my message to the public would be still call 999 if you're seriously ill. But if you can get to hospital, either in a taxi or if somebody can help you, it would be really good if people could do that.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, that was a paramedic whose conscience really got the better of him, I suppose. His moral compass in that sense. He decided he could not bring himself to let patients down today. But on a picket line in Nottingham, paramedic at East Midlands Ambulance Service Connor Swanwick says that it's vital that paramedics take a stand. Just before we go to this clip, quickly, I just want to whiz you through a couple of quick things. So Category 1 is basically you're literally about to die / are dying / have stopped breathing. Everything else, you'll be lucky to get an ambulance today. Just have a listen to Connor.
We're losing so many staff because they just can't physically afford to stay in the job. I've had friends leave this year alone that have gone to be delivery drivers, working somewhere else because they've said they can get more money and better hours with it, and they just can't keep providing for their families with it. And as a result, that's what it comes down to. It's the money that people need to live, and that's why people had to stop today. Because we can't keep going like this. We can't keep providing a safe service for people if everyone's leaving and they can't stay in the jobs. We go into life-threatening emergencies and hearing the radio broadcasts for uncovered Category 1 calls, those life-threatening conditions, followed by just a deafening silence where no one's able to shout up and go, I'm free, send me to it, I'll help. And it's soul-destroying to know that there are people out there begging for help, and we just physically have no staff to go because people can't afford to stay in the job. And if they need an ambulance will be sent. There's a safe level of staffing put in today. We've worked with the organisations to make sure that we're not understaffed, that people are still able to go to those life-threatening emergencies where possible.
Mark my words, I will be sitting here tomorrow talking about life-threatening emergencies where there was not ambulances able to get to the scene and people have died as a result. And I am reading stories already. OAP 93 waited in agony on floor for 25 hours. And that was, of course, before these strikes even took place. Just want to whiz you through a couple of bits and bobs here when it comes to the ambulance services in your area where they are on strike and where they have declared a critical incident. It's everywhere is in a critical incident at the moment, basically. But the east of England, they're not striking. Everywhere else, basically, they are. What is a Category 1, though? What is a Category 1, just in case you're wondering right now? Well, Category 1 is a life-threatening injury such as a cardiac arrest, so the heart actually stops. So the only way that you're getting an ambulance toot sweet today is if you're dead, right? And then Category 2, heart attacks, but you're not dead yet. Strokes, sepsis, major burns. Good luck. Get an ambulance today. Category 3, by the way, this was clearly drawn up by a bloke because Category 3 includes the late stages of labour. So I don't think any woman would ever, in the history of womanhood, would ever see that as a Category 3 emergency. But there you go. You're just going to have to give birth at home on the floor, really. And Category 4, non-urgent issues such as diarrhoea. Well, to be fair, I think that's fair enough. Well, it'd have to be awful, wouldn't it? You'd have to be in the World War I trench if your diarrhoea was that bad. You needed an ambulance. But, yeah, the target time for that was already 3 hours, so by which point you might already be in a bit of a mess in more ways than one. But there we go. My point here being is actually, do you think that is good enough? Do you think that the moral duties here have been laid at the door? And the reason why I ask this is because I'm already getting reports through. In fact, we broke this news a little bit earlier on, that people like you and your relatives are being thanked for not calling 999. Oh, it's great, they say. We are experiencing far less 999 calls than we usually would. Thank you, members of the public, for helping us out. Right, OK, now, look, I think we all know that some people call 999 for absolutely ridiculous reasons, and I am sure that they get a lot of rubbish there that they don't need to deal with. But my big concern with that, and my very first thought when I heard that people weren't calling 999 because they didn't want to overburden the service, frankly, was the elderly. A lot of elderly people don't like to be a burden at the best of times, let alone when they're reading headlines and seeing things and watching news broadcasts like this about ambulance strikes, ambulance drivers going on strikes, call handlers going on strike, and they're thinking, well, actually, I don't want to be a burden. Well, that's a real shame. And lots of you have been getting in touch because the government is playing a blame game here and the unions are playing a blame game. That's precisely why we are where we are, OK? So the government is saying, well, we have offered them something. It was in the region of around 4%. The unions are saying we want 5% above inflation. So quick maths, realistically, I suppose that's around a 16% pay rise. Bear in mind that there have already been a couple of pay rises in the last 2 years as well, one of around 3.5%, one of around 4%. So a lot of people saying, well, actually, you've already had a bit of a pay rise. The government are saying, well, Steve Barclay is saying, and this is a real kind of increase in rhetoric, and this is what I wanted your views on. Steve Barclay is saying that the unions are now deliberately targeting patient health. The unions, of course, deny that completely. They say they're shocked by that rhetoric. And I wanted to know, who do you blame when people die today? GBViews at GBnews.uk. Patricia's been on, says the NHS workers and their union representatives are holding a gun to both the government's head and the people of this country. The ones on strike have shown their true colours. They obviously did not enter the profession to care for patients and save lives. Shame on them. That's Patricia's view. Now, I will counter that slightly, Patricia, by saying that there was a YouGov poll published earlier today that showed 63% of the great British public support ambulance strikes. 65% for nurses, OK? John says paramedics and nurses are at the bottom of the NHS pay scale compared to the diversity managers, etc., and the rest of made-up jobs in the health services. Perhaps we should be looking at this and a branch and roots inquiry into this. Yeah, and a lot of people are echoing this exact view, actually, this exact view, John, which is, well, we get that maybe, you know, paramedics and nurses, etc., could do with the pay rise, and I think are quite willing to give that to them, not maybe to the extent of the level that they want it. But let's just have a look at where some of our money is going. Anyway, the amount of existing wastage that's there and the amount of people, directors of lived experience or diversity managers on whopping great big salaries for, some would argue, made-up and pointless jobs. But there we go. But I do want to keep your views coming in because we're returning this throughout the course of the show. Who do you blame as and when, unfortunately, people do die today as a result of these strikes? GBViews at GBnews.uk. Is it the government or is it the unions? Let's turn now to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is in Westminster for us for the political angle on this. The government's still not budging, Darren.
No, they're really not. They had a meeting today, Patrick, in Whitehall, a Cobra meeting, effectively an emergency meeting, if you like, with various ministers from across government departments, including the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay. But that was not to talk about how to bring these strikes to an end. Rather, it was about how to mitigate some of the consequences of the strikes in terms of the impact on the health service, particularly today with paramedics, but also looking ahead to further events, not least of all strikes by border guards at airports and ports this weekend. And it is interesting, the government still digging in their heels on all of this, saying that they are not prepared to reopen these kind of pay negotiations. Now, it is all terribly complex because there are different unions involved in different sectors looking for different amounts of money. In fact, some unions have even suggested they're not going to put a figure on it. But what they all do agree on, what they all do want to talk about is not just conditions, which the government said they're prepared to talk about, but this issue of pay. Now, the government's argument repeatedly has been that that will help fuel inflation, the very cause of the reason that we're in this mess. However, the unions turn around and say, well, hold on a moment, that pay body conclusion was based on inflation when it was predicted to be much lower than it is now. And actually, lots of economists would suggest that, you know what, wage increases in the public sector don't actually increase inflation by very much. We've got this incredible standoff at the moment, both sides not willing to relent. And as you say, we've also got this war of words between the Health Secretary and the unions, which has definitely been ratcheted up in the last 24 hours or so. Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, overnight saying that the unions, particularly the ambulance unions, had taken a conscious choice to inflict harm upon patients. A very, very strong response from the Unite boss, Sharon Graham, who called that a blatant lie. Frankly, the upshot of all of this is that as we enter Christmas and New Year, there is little sign that any of these strikes are going to be sorted out anytime soon, and we can frankly expect a lot further disruption in the new year.
Yeah, we can, absolutely. And Darren, I know I spoke to you a little bit earlier on, but I'm just keen to revisit this slightly, which is that the Labour Party as well have got a relatively well-entrenched position. They're not really budging on this as well. They're saying they will just have more talks. And as you said as well, Darren, that this is likely to rumble on. Now, I can't help but wonder whether or not the government is deciding that maybe the longer this runs on and the bigger impact that there is to public health, etc., maybe, just maybe, the more public opinion will turn against the striking workers. We saw it a bit when it came to what's going on with the railways, for example. I believe they're down to about an average of around 44% support, if the latest YouGov poll is correct. Currently, ambulance drivers are on 63% of public support for what they're doing, and nurses are on 65%. If I end up sitting here and reading over the course of the next weeks, Darren, that more and more people are dying and that the 600 members of the Army and Navy and the RAF who've been brought in haven't had much of an impact, etc., then potentially that public opinion might shift, do you think?
Yeah, it's really fascinating, this. You're right to point out the good example of the railway workers. It's fair to say a couple of months ago there was a slim majority, I think, in favour of strike action. That has come down somewhat, and there'll be a lot of people sitting at home who don't work in the public sector who think, actually, you know what, lots of people in the public sector do get paid relatively well. Certainly when you take in all the enumeration, things like pensions, for example, or sick pay, they are a lot better off, some would suggest, than those of equivalent wages inside the private sector. But this is a very risky gamble for the government, because you're right, it is also very possible that the public may well turn around and say, you know what, the government aren't even at the table in these negotiations, and frankly, it is their fault. But I don't know where the government go with all of this. If they're really not going to move on it, are they just hoping, as you've suggested, that somehow public opinion turns in their favour, that the unions frankly run out of steam? At the end of the day, we have to remember that every strike day has an impact, of course, on the wider economy, but as an impact on those people striking, they are not earning money, and it will get to a point where, frankly, people will potentially not be able to carry on with strike action. Whatever the political positioning of all of this is, I think for the millions of people who are caught in the middle of all of this, who are not part of the unions or indeed on the side of the government, there is deep, deep frustration that we're frankly going through a winter of discontent. And as I suggested, there is no sign it's going to come to an end in 2023.
Yeah, Darren, look, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey there, who's in Westminster for us. Look, a lot of people are getting in touch with me as well, saying things like, well, actually, the quality of care and the quality of service that they're already getting isn't good enough. And I think it's interesting to point out some things here. There is a massive counter to what I'm about to say now, which is that, well, if they are under-resourced and understaffed, then how can they hit arrival times for ambulances? But it tends to be relatively decent when it comes to Category 1. You may remember those Category 1 cases that I outlined to you before, which is basically if your heart stopped beating, pretty much, or you are in desperate risk of immediate death, then actually they're supposed to get to you within around 8 minutes. They normally get there, according to the figures I've got here, about 9.5. Not too bad, is it? Let's be honest with you. Not a bad service, that. But the lower down the category list you get, the longer it takes. And then by the time that you get down to your Category 4s, which supposedly there's a waiting time expected there of around 3 hours, you can end up waiting around 4 and a bit hours. In the case of poor old 93-year-old lady Elizabeth Davis, she waited 25 hours for someone to come. And yes, we are hearing that 999 calls are down. That's kind of one of the breaking lines to come out of today, really, which is that the general public are stepping in to help ease the burden on the ambulance staff by, frankly, not calling 999. We all know that there will be excessive and prank calls and needless phone calls as well to 999. I think it's important that they are, frankly, just biffed anyway. But I have a massive concern that the people, as indeed Lisa does, is on the inbox. Lisa, thank you very much. Apparently she just told me it's pronounced Lisa, so there you go, Lisa, have a bit of that. Says, I bet the drop in people calling ambulances are the very people who need it the most, the older generation with a keep calm and carry on attitude. And some people as well pointing out, well, hang on a minute, did the public not do its duty for the NHS during the pandemic, and now the public is being asked to do its duty again by not using the NHS during this particular crisis? Very much two sides to this. Strong views when it comes from what the unions are saying, which is that the government should be talking to us about pay. There would maybe be room for compromise, although as it currently stands, the government has offered 4%, pretty much a broad brush 4% for medical workers. And when it comes to the unions in charge of the ambulances, etc., they want 5% above inflation, which is roughly about 16%. Nurses, of course, 19%. There's a gaping chasm of difference there, and it doesn't look as though anything is going to be sorted any time soon. But in the meantime, 63% of you, apparently, support ambulance strikes, and 65% of you, apparently, support nurses' strikes. Where are you on that, though? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up, I've got loads more for you, because the Scottish Parliament is set to vote on controversial amendments to the Gender Recognition Act that would allow children as young as 16 to legally reassign their gender. Also, by the way, and importantly, people who are accused of things like rape and crimes against women can change their gender and end up in a woman's prison or in women's spaces, which I think, frankly, is a catastrophe. But there we go. We'll have the very latest on that. First, though, let's take a look at your weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A bit of a north-south split developing with our weather over the next couple of days. Sunny spells across the north, not too many showers. Further south, quite misty and murky conditions. The UK is surrounded by low-pressure systems at the moment. This one is drifting away, but it's still providing some gusty winds and plenty of showers through Wednesday evening across much of the north. Those showers steadily fading overnight. Further south, generally it's dry through the evening until we start to see rain and drizzle just pushing up across southern areas. That rain could be heavy for a time as well, and as it moves in, just leaving a lot of mist and murk and low cloud, quite poor visibility on some of the higher routes. It will stay reasonably mild, temperatures mostly above freezing, but pockets of frost possible with some clearer skies over northeast England and northern Scotland. Into the details for Thursday. As I said, a bit of a north-south split. Misty, murky conditions in the south with rain and drizzle at times drifting in. Brighter skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some scattered showers, particularly in northern Scotland. The winds generally lighter than today, but the winds will strengthen and bring down colder air across Shetland, where the showers may well start to turn to snow once more. Further south, though, look at that, 10, 11, 12 degrees, so it's mild, but it is still quite dank and drizzly well into the evening and staying quite murky again. Poor visibility on some of the higher routes across the south as we head through Thursday night and into Friday. Friday, of course, many people may well be hitting the roads, and be aware that we are looking at some heavy rain coming in across England and Wales. This band of rain sweeping its way northwards, so it could be pretty heavy for a time. Again, misty, murky conditions for many as well. Much of Scotland looking dry and bright through most of Friday till this rain creeps into the south. It'll turn wet across Northern Ireland later on Friday as well. That's wet weather leads into a mild start to the Christmas period. Dull and damp for most, but turning colder during Christmas from the northwest.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Well, I'm sure we can all agree that the issue of women's rights and indeed child safety as well are hugely, hugely important things. But let's just bear that in mind when we talk about this next topic, because the Scottish Parliament has been debating whether children as young as 16 should be able to change their legal gender this afternoon. A number of rallies have taken place outside the Scottish Parliament, both in favour and against the proposed change to legislation. There is a lot to unpack here when it comes to this. It's not as straightforward as it sounds. MSPs are considering whether to remove certain hurdles to changing gender, which are specified in the 2004 Gender Recognition Act. So, if the bill is passed, those wanting to change their designation will no longer need a doctor's diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So, me as a 15-year-old, or your son or daughter, or whatever they want to be known as going forward, would not need a doctor to tell them that they've got gender dysphoria. They can decide it on their own. They'll also need to have lived in their chosen gender for just 3 months. Think how quickly 3 months of your life goes. And that is enough time, apparently, for you to be categorically certain, as a child, that you are born into the wrong body and need to change your gender. Anyway, there's much more to it than that as well, because as far as we're aware, it does appear that people who are currently waiting trial for things like rape could end up being allowed to change their gender. What does that mean for women's spaces? What does that mean for women's prisons? Joining me now is the Director of Transgender Trend, Stephanie Davies-Arai. Thank you very much. Now, look, I am keen to get your views on this for obvious reasons. Why on earth is this such a top priority for the SNP? Because from where I'm sitting now, it would appear that, you know, women, for example, are a much bigger voter base than the very vocal trans lobby.
Well, they are, but they haven't been listened to and their concerns haven't been taken seriously. And then we're told that a rapist standing trial could just change the sex on his birth certificate and gain legal status as a woman and be put into a women's prison just like that, with no checks and balances or any concern about the issues that women have been raising, and we've been told that we're fear-mongering. But this is a bill that allows any man to change, not his gender, his sex on his birth certificate, to say that he was born female, which gives him legal status as female. So clearly that impacts on women's rights, but women have not been listened to, and women's fears and concerns have not been heard. And this bill has been rushed through by the Scottish Parliament for whatever reason. They want to do this to look progressive, to obey the trans lobby. I don't know. But as it stands, women are saying no, and women...
But just to clarify, there's two issues here. There's child safety as far as, well, there's a load of issues, but two big ones. Child safety, as far as I can see, which is that a lot of children who maybe have autism or other different mental health problems as well, potentially can now change their gender, whether that's physically or just on a birth certificate. That could lead to bigger issues down the line. I mean, that must be a concern, Stephanie.
And this is my area. This is my area of biggest concern, what's happening to teenagers. So to be able to change the sex on your birth certificate will impact what kind of clinical treatment and therapeutic treatment you receive, it's not going to be as possible for a therapist to explore underlying issues about why you feel the way you do if a child has a gender recognition certificate. It also will impact on schools. So if a child is socially transitioned, as it's called in schools, then that child is being told and has a gender recognition certificate. Is a school going to dare to keep single-sex toilets and changing rooms, for example, and protect girls' sports when a child has a certificate saying that they are legally the opposite sex? This creates huge problems for schools, for other children, because don't forget, social transition is not legislation for that one child. It's legislation for every single other child in the school who has to socially transition that child and use the compelled language.
Yeah, now there are also serious concerns that Nicola Sturgeon's government is rushing through this controversial gender reform before Christmas in order to avoid a revolt from a lady called Kate Forbes, who is an SNP minister who would, or is expected to vote against this, who would then have to resign, which will be a political scandal. That, to me, is just another element of absolute lunacy. Can I just get some clarification for you, Stephanie? As we understand it, then, if I was on bail for rape, for raping a woman, and I was in Scotland and I lived as a woman for 3 months, I could change my gender or sex to that of a woman, and I could, presumably whilst on bail for rape, go into women's changing rooms, as we understand it.
As it stands now, that's how I understand it. I've heard that there are going to be some things coming up to address that later, but it's not. The amendment was voted down. So as it stands now, yes. And also as it stands, 16-year-olds can get a gender recognition certificate. And as you say, a lot of these teenagers are on the autism spectrum. A lot of them are children in care, children with mental health issues, and the government is reinforcing one simplistic narrative to these children without giving them proper care and ignoring safeguarding.
Stephanie, thank you very, very much. I'm sorry that we're a little bit squeezed for time here, but I'm glad that we managed to try to pack as much as we possibly could in there. That's Stephanie Davies-Arai there, who is Director of Transgender Trend, reacting to what lunacy is going on north of the border up in Scotland. You're with me, Patrick Christys, here on GB News. Now, though, we're going to go to your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon to you. Well, good evening, I should say. It is a winter's night, isn't it? And our top story tonight, ambulance unions have been reacting angrily after the government accused them of making a conscious choice to harm patients by going out on strike.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it?
Well, the Health Secretary, for his part, Steve Barclay, claims the unions are refusing to work with the government at a national level on how they can cover emergencies during strike action. Unite's Sharon Graham says the comments are a blatant lie and an embarrassment for him and the government. The GMB union has called the comments insulting, and Unison's General Secretary, Christina McInerney, says Mr Barclay doesn't even want to negotiate.
We sit down in a room, you have a bit of give and take on both sides. But I'm getting nothing from him or from this government. All they're saying to me is, we can't negotiate about pay. And where does that leave us? One of the reasons the ambulance service, the NHS, is in such a dire state is because they haven't invested in the workforce. So people leave. Those who are left are under increasing pressure. These people don't get meal breaks. They hardly get a day off. They work excessive overtime because it's the only way the service can run.
A man who admitted murdering his pregnant partner and 3 children in Derbyshire will spend the rest of his life in jail. Damien Bendel was given a whole life order for killing Terry Harris, her children Lacey and John Paul Bennett, and Lacey's friend Connie Gent in September last year. The Home Secretary says the government's actively considering the use of cruise ships to house asylum seekers. Suella Braverman has been saying the vessels, along with disused holiday parks and former student halls, are among options being looked at to help reduce the reliance on hotels. She told the Lords Justice and Home Affairs Committee hotels are an acceptable cost. aren't an acceptable cost to the taxpayer, and alternative sites are needed. You are up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Don't go anywhere. We're back in just a moment. So, a snapshot of today's markets for you. And the pound will buy you $1.2059, €1.1386, and the price of gold is £1,507.58 an ounce. The FTSE closing today at 7,497.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons. I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel. Welcome back, everybody. Right now, the Health Secretary says that the ambulance strikes today are putting lives at risk. Well, earlier today, the National Medical Director of NHS England has warned people not to take unnecessary risks. He says that we need to all be sensible during this difficult time, so we take the burden off our ambulance crews and our NHS. But he's not the first to tell us to be extra careful today. Health Minister Will Quince says
people are planning any risky activity, I would strongly encourage them not to do so.
OK, so let's just run through some of the things that you definitely shouldn't be doing today while people go on strike. Fancy a bit of a kickabout? No, it's a contact sport. Forget about it. You've been told you can't do that. That game of ice hockey I had planned, that's out of the window now. American football, forget about it, OK? Fancy a pint after work? No, stick to the water instead, because during NHS strike action, drinking is too risky. Isn't that right, Will Quince?
People are planning any risky activity, I would strongly encourage them not to do so.
Fancy a walk this evening? No, it's too dangerous. What if the pavement is slippy? From the rain it turns to ice, or the local council hasn't filled in a pothole? Danger, danger, danger everywhere. For all the women out there now who are about to give birth this evening. No, don't go into labour. Don't you dare. Isn't that right, Will Quince?
People are planning any risky activity, I would strongly encourage them not to do so.
And finally, check on your elderly neighbours in case that they've got into difficulty, but just FaceTime them. Don't leave the house, because that is too much of a risk. For goodness sake, ladies and gentlemen, do not get ill today. Do not fall over. Don't give birth. Don't have a stroke. Hang on, what's this? Sorry, I'm just getting something in my ear right now. Yeah, I am covering for Mark Stein.
Patrick, we can't have you getting injured over Christmas. You've got too much.
You're taking the mick?
Too much cover.
I've got it. Well, I know I'm covering for Mark Stein later. I'm doing Christmas Day. Yeah. What? I'm not allowed to get injured at all.
No.
What? But I can't. I've got a kickabout scheduled later.
No, sorry.
This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. I can't do the news. Like, what's going to happen to me in here? Oh, right. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, just wrap yourselves in bubble wrap. Okay. Just wrap yourselves in bubble wrap today, because we all have to protect our NHS. What's that?
Just being careful.
Just a sticker that says fragile. Right, OK. All right, well, this is me now, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic stuff. Fantastic. So I am just taking Will Quince's advice, OK? Wrap yourself in bubble wrap. I will not be giving birth. Hopefully I won't be having a stroke. I certainly won't be having a pint. I won't go outside. I won't have a kickabout with my mates, because we've got to take the burden off our NHS. Right, the winter of discontent that we're witnessing spans workers in many different public sectors. Ambulance workers, of course, they've walked out today. National highways workers, they're set to stage more action. Rail workers are planning to strike again in the new year. Recent YouGov polling, though, suggests the majority of Brits are backing NHS staff in their strike action. And, of course, are more in support of NHS staff than baggage handlers. 63% of people, they back ambulance workers on strike today, with nurses who walked out yesterday having more than 66% of people supporting their cause. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, I am now fully supporting the ambulance strikers and the nurses striking. I have decided to wrap myself in bubble wrap so nothing happens to me in order to protect our beloved NHS. Joining me now is independent statistician and former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics and Socialist Party Southern Region Organiser, Nick Chaffee. Let's start with you, Jamie. Does public support for our healthcare workers mean that pay rises might be more likely, do you think?
Well, I don't think so, Patrick. I think, obviously, the nurses and the ambulance workers is one of the first strikes that they're going on. And when you look at the rail workers, they've been in prolonged strike for a while. And if you look at the actual YouGov survey itself, they're saying that they're blaming the government for the nurses going on strike. There's actually more blame for the unions when you get onto the rail workers. And just think about it as well. Most people, obviously, there's more people who will go for a train each day than go to the hospital. That's probably playing into a bit of the figures, because there's been a long period of disruption, whereas people tend not to go to the hospital as much. And obviously, if you phone for an ambulance and you can't get one, I'm sure you won't be supporting the strike there. So I think that's probably what we're seeing in the figures. But, the important thing probably is today is not the day as you wrap yourself up there to go and do some risky stuff is what you're kind of highlighting there, because we know that if you get those category 1 calls, like a heart problem, cardiac arrest, you've got a 7-minute target to respond to those, and they're not even in there before the strike, Patrick.
Well, this is the thing. Right, OK, so, Nick, I'll bring you into it now, mate, because if we do decide to give them all, an inflation-busting, 5% above inflation, apparently, is what they want, an inflation-busting pay rise, and all of a sudden we still end up with, bless her, the Elizabeth Davies, a 93-year-old woman screaming in pain on the floor, dying because of a fractured hip, waiting 25 hours for an ambulance. People are going to go, what was all that for? What's this value for money?
Well, obviously, the problems facing the health service were the problems of yesterday, the day before, last week and last month. The ambulance service is in crisis. And the best way to resolve that first step is to pay ambulance workers what they deserve, which is an inflation-proof pay rise. All workers should be in receipt of that. Why should anyone be receiving a pay cut at the present time? The bankers aren't receiving a pay cut. They've just had their bonuses opened up and increased.
I'm just going to stick with you, Nick. I'm just going to stick with you, Nick, on that. Right? It's because you said a phrase there that I think will have stood out to a lot of people. You said all workers deserve an inflation-busting pay rise. But to be fair, any economist would think that's mental.
Well, they would probably, because they're overpaid and underworked, not like the majority of people at the moment who are overworked and underpaid. And that's been the problem for the last decade. And people have been pushed to a tipping point. And obviously, as trade unionists, we don't distinguish between the deserving and the undeserving. In a hospital, the whole system works on the basis of cleaners, of porters, of everyone in the hospital working together. And it's by standing together that we have our power to influence change, which is what people are seeking at the present time.
OK, Jamie, I'll throw it back to your way. We have already seen that support for rail workers is being diminished, by the way. It's around the 44% mark. Previously, it was much higher. Jamie, would you be expecting to see maybe something similar taking place when it comes to our healthcare professionals as well? If people do start dying, I'm sitting here tomorrow talking about the amount of people dying as a result of ambulance strikes, which hopefully I'm not, but I probably will be. Do you think public support will drop?
Well, it probably will drop, but I don't think it'll drop as much as what we got the rail workers. Remember, everybody was out clapping for the NHS through the pandemic. And if you look at the private sector, you've got to take a kind of the point that's just been raised there. If you're looking at the private sector, the average pay growth in the private sector the last year is just over 6%. So they're not all getting inflation-busting pay rises in the private sector as well. And I think ultimately, if with the rail workers, if there's no trains, people get frustrated they can't get around. But if the ambulances can't get out and reach you and people die, that is obviously a serious matter. And the problem with the ambulance workers is not in particular the ambulance services in crisis because of the ambulances themselves. It's more to do with the fact that, if you take the 7 days in the most recent data in the UK, in England, Patrick, we've had like 29,000 hours wasted of ambulances stuck outside because they can't put patients in the hospital. That's the issue with the ambulance service at the moment.
All right, OK, well, look, it'll be fascinating to see how public support does or indeed does not continue for these strikes. Look, thank you very much, both of you. A little bit squeezed for time here. It's always this way at the end of one of my shows because I'm terrible at timekeeping. But thank you very much, both of you. A range of views. Nick Chaffee there, of course, and as well Jamie Jenkins, who's getting in touch. He's the independent statistician and former head of health analysis. And Nick Chaffee was the Southern Region organiser, still is apparently, and Socialist Party. Right, moving on. The New York Times has published yet another piece slamming the royal family and Britain as institutionally racist. Oh, it's all getting a bit boring now, isn't it? After the alleged treatment of Meghan Markle. Opinion writer Roxane Gay suggested that the Duchess of Sussex had to pay with her life to marry into the institution. Yeah, all right. It is the latest article in the New York Times to take a negative attitude towards British institutions in recent months. With me now is former royal correspondent for The Sun, Charles Ray. Charlie, great to have you on. Thank you very, very much. Why has the New York Times decided that we're all a bunch of frothing racists? Do you reckon any of them have ever actually been to Britain?
Well, clearly not. I mean, I'm getting sick and tired of a bunch of pseudo-intellectuals in America preaching and teaching us or complaining about racism. Excuse me, they're American and they've got enough problems in their country about race, far, far more than we have. And I think it's absolutely disgraceful, the attack on the royal family.
But is this exactly the effect that Meghan and Harry have had now? It's all very well and good them wanting to find freedom and to find, let's be honest with you, tens of millions of pounds either in Oprah's bosom or in Netflix or in wherever else, Spotify, right? But are they actively portraying Britain as a racist country on the world stage? Because that is unforgivable.
Yeah, no, it looks like that's what they're doing. They are accusing, they are whipping up all this hateful stuff that they claim that they're getting back from social media and everything else, and they're whipping it all up. Now, this is not the first time this New York Times has done this. This is about the third or fourth time they've had a pop at the monarchy, and to suggest that Meghan was could have paid with her life for joining the royal family, and I don't know where this Roxane.
Well, it's just rubbish, isn't it? Charles, talk about paying with your life. I mean, I'm not being funny, but I'd put up with marrying Harry for a matter of weeks before I had to go to America and earn absolutely millions. I mean, the house is so big, she never has to see him from one day to the next. She could have someone else round.
I'd pay money for you to marry Harry, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
But no,
well, the thing is, I'd turn him back into the old Harry, right? We'd be in Las Vegas doing whatever before you know what.
Yeah, and, you know, it's this continual sniping from these American people that it's starting to really grate with it. They're accusing, you know, it's the tabloid press that's done it all. It's online racism and everything else. But to suggest that the royal family is racist and the Britain is racist, no, they are not. The royal family is not a racist organisation. Britain is not a racist country. It is just ludicrous for these people to suggest it.
Charlie Ray, thank you very much, as ever. Charles Ray there, the former royal correspondent for The Sun. Right, we're nearly out of time because up next, it is Jubes and Co. But this time, it's with Emily Carver, who is here in the studio. What you got coming up, Emily?
Yes, apologies. I am not Michelle Dewberry. She is taking her Christmas break from today. So, what I think is one of the biggest stories of the day, and I think Scotland is about to make a massive mistake. That's the Scottish gender self-declaration that's going to be happening. So people will be able to declare their legal gender without even a medical diagnosis. I'm worried about what this means for children. Children as young as 16 will be able to legally change their gender. I'm worried about what that means for women's rights. And, of course, another big story of the day is those ambulance strikes. I saw you looking a bit fragile earlier because you've been advised not to take part in any risky activities. I'm asking, has Steve Barclay and the government got it right on this one? Who's to blame?
Well, there we go. Emily, good stuff. It'll be a fantastic show, no doubt. Emily Carver will be covering for Michelle Dewberry just after me in a matter of moments, but a cheeky little plug for something else I've got on later as well. I'm going to have to wrap myself back up in the bubble wrap. I am covering so many shows here on GB News that they are not allowing me to run any risk of getting injured whatsoever. I'm not allowed to, well, a bit like the vast majority of the British public now, which is the government's advice in the face of ambulance strikes and nurses' strikes. Don't you dare go outside your own house, pretty much. Don't you dare give birth if you're a woman. Good grief, can you imagine? Don't have a pint, just in case you end up in A&E. Oh, yeah, good luck if you decide you want to have a stroke today or anything like that. Just leave it out, people. We all need to protect our beloved NHS.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A bit of a north-south split developing with our weather over the next couple of days. Sunny spells across the north, not too many showers. Further south, quite misty and murky conditions. The UK is surrounded by low-pressure systems at the moment. This one is drifting away, but it's still providing some gusty winds and plenty of showers through Wednesday evening across much of the north. Those showers steadily fading overnight. Further south, generally it's dry through the evening until we start to see rain and drizzle just pushing up across southern areas. That rain could be heavy for a time as well as it moves in, just leaving a lot